Welcome back to Sir Ravenclaw. Tonight, 18 terrifying cryptid encounters from the Appalachian Mountains await you. These stories come from those who ventured too deep into ancient forests and met creatures that shouldn't exist. Subscribe and let me know where you're listening from, especially if you're in the Appalachians right now. Let's begin with our first encounter. Story 1. The Wendigo of Cold Mountain. Marcus Wheeler had been a park ranger for 12 years, but nothing in his training prepared him for what he found that December morning on Cold Mountain. The North Carolina wilderness was his second home, every trail memorized, every sound catalogued in his mind. That's why the silence bothered him so much. He'd started his patrol at dawn, the fresh snow crunching beneath his boots. The first carcass appeared 2 miles into the backcountry trail, a massive buck, torn apart with surgical precision. Not unusual in itself, except for how the organs were arranged in a perfect circle around the body, steaming in the frigid air. Marcus radioed it in. "Base, this is Wheeler. Found something odd at marker 17. Large buck, but the kill pattern's wrong." Static crackled back. "Wrong how?" He crouched beside the carcass, studying the wounds. "Predator removed the organs and arranged them. Never seen anything like it. Probably just coyotes playing with their food. Continue patrol." But Marcus knew coyote behavior, and this wasn't it. The cuts were too clean, too deliberate. He photographed the scene and moved on, unease settling in his stomach like a cold stone. By noon, he'd found 3 more carcasses, each more disturbing than the last. The third deer had been skinned, its hide draped over nearby branches like laundry. The fourth made him stop breathing. It wasn't a deer, the bones were human, arranged in the same ritualistic pattern. Based on the clothing scraps, it was the hiker reported missing 2 weeks ago. Marcus's hands shook as he called it in, requesting immediate backup and a recovery team. That's when he heard it, a sound that shouldn't exist in any forest. It started as a low moan, almost wind-like, before rising into something between a howl and a scream. The noise seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, reverberating through the trees until his teeth ached. His radio died. Not static, not interference, complete silence. His GPS flickered and went dark. Even his analog compass spun wildly, the needle dancing like something possessed. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in seconds. His breath came out in thick clouds, and frost spread across the trees like reaching fingers. In his 12 years of ranging, Marcus had never felt Cold Mountain live up to its name quite like this. Movement caught his eye, something massive slipping between the pines 50 yards ahead. He glimpsed pale flesh stretched over 2 long limbs, antlers that scraped the canopy 30 feet up. It moved wrong, joints bending in ways that made his mind rebel. Marcus ran. Behind him, that horrible howl scream erupted again, closer now. He could hear it crashing through the underbrush, no longer trying to hide. The sound of splintering wood filled the air as trees gave way to its passage. He knew these trails by heart, knew there was an old ranger station a mile ahead, abandoned but solid with thick walls and barred windows. His lungs burned in the frozen air, legs pumping through snow that seemed to grab at his boots. The station appeared through the trees like salvation. Marcus slammed through the door, throwing the deadbolt and backing away as something enormous hit the walls. The entire structure shook, dust raining from the rafters. Through the window, he finally saw it clearly. The Wendigo stood 15 feet tall, its body a mockery of human form stretched to breaking point. Pale skin hung loose over visible bones, and its skull-like head bore massive antlers that scraped the station's roof. But the eyes were the worst part. Still human, still intelligent, filled with a hunger that transcended mere appetite. It spoke, and Marcus wished it hadn't. The voice was layered, as if multiple people were speaking through water. So hungry. Always hungry. The creature circled the station, testing windows, probing for weakness. Marcus found emergency flares in a supply cabinet, standard equipment that might buy him time. When the Wendigo's arm burst through a window, he lit one and pressed it against the grasping claw. The scream that followed shattered the remaining windows. The creature recoiled, and Marcus saw his chance. The station had a snowmobile out back, old but maintained. He burst through the rear door, flares in hand, lighting and throwing them as the Wendigo rounded the building. The engine caught on the third try. Marcus gunned it down the mountain, the speedometer buried as trees blurred past. Behind him, that horrible howling grew distant but never stopped. He made it to the main road where his truck waited, abandoning the snowmobile and driving straight to town. The recovery team found the human remains the next day, but no sign of any large predator. His photos showed only empty forest. Marcus transferred to a coastal park the following month. He never spoke officially about what he saw, but sometimes, in bars where other rangers gather, he'd share his story. And always, someone else would nod knowingly and buy the next round. Because in the deep places of the Appalachians, there are things that hunger for more than flesh. Things that were human once, before the mountains changed them. And once you've heard a Wendigo scream, you never quite stop listening for it in the wind. Story 2. The Mothman of New River Gorge. Sarah Chen had inspected bridges for 6 years, but the New River Gorge Bridge always made her pulse quicken. Not from fear of heights. At 876 feet above the river, fear was a luxury she couldn't afford. It was something else, something she couldn't name until that foggy October evening when everything went wrong. The inspection was routine, scheduled for after tourist hours when the bridge saw minimal traffic. Sarah and her partner Rick began their work as the sun dipped below the mountains, painting the gorge in shades of rust and shadow. Their equipment, ultrasonic sensors, strain gauges, thermal cameras, hummed quietly as they methodically checked each cable and joint. "Sarah, my thermal's acting up again," Rick called from 20 feet down the catwalk, "getting some kind of interference." She checked her own equipment. The screen flickered with static, showing heat signatures where there should be none. Mine too, must be electrical interference from the lights. But the bridge lights were LED, designed specifically not to interfere with sensitive equipment. Sarah made a note in her tablet, then froze as her stylus stopped working. The screen went black, then blazed back to life, showing impossible readings, temperatures shifting wildly, structural stress appearing and disappearing like ghostly afterimages. "Rick, we should..." She stopped. Rick was staring up at the main cables, his face pale in the work lights. "Do you see that?" His voice was barely a whisper. Sarah followed his gaze. At first she saw nothing unusual, just the massive cables disappearing into the fog above. Then something moved. A shadow, but wrong somehow, too large and moving against the wind. It shifted along the cables with an unsettling grace, and for a moment Sarah glimpsed wings. Enormous wings that seemed to absorb the light around them. "Probably just a turkey vulture," she said, not believing it herself. Turkey vultures didn't have wingspans that could dwarf a small plane. They didn't move like that, flowing like liquid shadow along steel cables. The work lights flickered and died. Emergency lighting kicked in, bathing everything in harsh red. In that crimson glow, Sarah saw something that would haunt her for years. It perched on the tower above them, wings folded against its body like a massive cloak. The creature had to be 10 feet tall, its form humanoid but wrong in every way that mattered. Where its face should be, 2 eyes glowed like hot coals, reflecting the emergency lights with an intensity that hurt to look at directly. Rick made a sound, half gasp, half prayer, and the thing's head snapped toward them. The eyes flared brighter, and Sarah felt a pressure in her skull, like fingers probing at the edges of her mind. Images flashed unbidden, the bridge collapsing, cars tumbling into the gorge, twisted metal and screaming voices. "Move," she hissed, grabbing Rick's arm. "Now." They ran along the catwalk, safety harnesses clanking against the rails. Behind them she heard no footsteps, no wing beats, just a presence that seemed to press against her back like a physical weight. The maintenance door was 50 feet away, then 30, then. The creature landed in front of them, wings spread to block the entire catwalk. This close, Sarah could see details that defied explanation. Its body seemed to shift between solid and shadow, as if it existed only partially in their reality. The wings weren't feathered or bat-like, but something between, covered in what looked like scales made of pure darkness. It spoke without moving its mouth, the words appearing directly in Sarah's mind. The bridge, weakening. Death comes on steel wings. More images flooded her consciousness. hairline cracks in support beams, metal fatigue in critical joints, a catastrophic failure waiting to happen. But mixed with these visions were older memories. Coal miners seeing the creature before cave-ins, railroad workers spotting it before derailments. Always a herald, always a warning. The Mothman, because what else could it be, tilted its head and stepped aside. The message was clear: leave. Sarah and Rick didn't need to be told twice. They scrambled past the creature, neither daring to look directly at it again. The maintenance door slammed behind them, and they ran through the bridge's interior passages until they reached their truck. "What do we report?" Rick asked, hands shaking as he fumbled with the keys. Sarah thought of the visions, the structural weaknesses burned into her mind. Everything, every crack, every stress point. "We recommend immediate closure and comprehensive inspection." "They'll think we're crazy." "Maybe, but if we're right." They filed their report that night, detailing extensive structural concerns that warranted immediate attention. Sarah included every weakness the creature had shown her, couching them in technical language and sensor anomalies. The bridge was closed for emergency inspection the next morning. The inspectors found exactly what Sarah had reported: metal fatigue and stress fractures that could have led to catastrophic failure within months. The repairs took 6 weeks and likely saved hundreds of lives. Sarah never saw the Mothman again, but she didn't need to. She knew it was out there, watching from the shadows, appearing when disaster loomed. She transferred to coastal bridges after that, not from fear, but from understanding. Some warnings you only need to hear once. The official report mentioned equipment malfunctions and lucky observations. But among the construction workers and inspectors of West Virginia, the story spread differently. They knew what Sarah had really seen that night, and they knew to pay attention when shadows moved wrong against the sky. Because in the mountains, death sometimes sends a herald. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, that herald gives you a chance to listen. Story 3. The Cherokee Devil. Tom Blackwood had spent 20 years documenting Cherokee history in the mountains of Tennessee, but the elders had always been reluctant to speak about certain things. It wasn't until his uncle lay dying that Tom learned why. "There are stories we don't tell outsiders," his uncle wheezed, gripping Tom's hand with surprising strength. "But you need to know. The old settlement past Klingman's Dome, never go there alone. And if you hear the cats crying like children, you run." Tom thought it was delirium until he found the journal. Hidden in his uncle's belongings was a leather-bound book dating to the 1820s, written by his ancestor, a Cherokee medicine man. The entries spoke of a creature the tribe had trapped and bound to a specific place, a thing that walked like a man but hunted like a cat, with the power to take any shape it desired. They called it the Ua, the Cherokee Devil. Professional curiosity overrode caution. Tom had documented dozens of sacred sites. This would be another for his research. He packed his camping gear, cameras, and recording equipment, telling his wife he'd be gone for 3 days. The October morning was crisp when he started up the unmarked trail his uncle's journal had described. The abandoned settlement lay 8 miles into wilderness that seemed to resist human passage. Tom had to cut through undergrowth that shouldn't have been so thick this late in the season, following landmarks mentioned in the journal. A lightning-struck oak, a creek that ran uphill for 100 yards, 3 stones arranged like a warning. He found the settlement just as the sun reached its zenith. 24 stone foundations spread across a natural clearing, their arrangements following no pattern he recognized from other Cherokee sites. At the center stood a single intact structure, a ceremonial house with symbols carved deep into every visible surface. The symbols hurt to look at directly, seeming to shift and writhe when caught in peripheral vision. Tom set up his base camp at the clearing's edge, far from the ceremonial house. As he documented the site, he noticed oddities. No birds sang here, no insects buzzed. Even the wind seemed to avoid the place, leaving an oppressive stillness that made every sound he made feel like sacrilege. The first sign came at dusk. Tom was photographing the ceremonial house when he heard it, a child crying somewhere in the forest. The sound was perfect, too perfect, hitting every parental instinct he had. But his uncle's warning echoed in his mind, and Tom forced himself to continue working, ignoring the cries that circled his camp. By full dark, the crying had changed. Now it came from multiple directions, a chorus of distressed children that no human throat could produce. Tom retreated to his tent, checking the loads in his rifle. Not that he believed bullets would help against something that had required an entire tribe to contain. Sleep was impossible. The crying continued, sometimes close enough that he could hear breathing outside his tent, sometimes distant like an echo of an echo. Around midnight, it stopped. The silence was worse. Tom peered out of his tent. In the moonlight he saw them, mountain lions, dozens of them, sitting in a perfect circle around his camp. But their eyes were wrong, too intelligent, too knowing. One of them grinned, its mouth stretching wider than any cat's should, revealing human teeth. They began to change. The transformation was fluid, flesh flowing like water. Cat became child, became something between, bipedal figures covered in tawny fur, with faces that couldn't decide what they wanted to be. They danced around his camp, movements that seemed to follow the patterns carved on the ceremonial house. Tom remembered the journal. His ancestor had written protective songs, Cherokee words that could hold the creature at bay. With shaking hands, he found the pages and began to sing, his voice cracking on syllables he barely understood. The creatures stopped dancing. One approached, its form stabilizing into something almost human, a tall figure with cat-slitted eyes and too many joints in its fingers. It spoke in perfect Cherokee, words Tom recognized from his studies. "You carry the blood of the one who bound us. We smell it in your veins." "I'm leaving," Tom said, continuing the protective chant between words. "I won't disturb this place again." The creature laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "The binding weakens. Each year we can wander farther. Soon we will be free." It leaned closer and Tom smelled copper and old death. "Tell the others. Tell them their ancestors' magic fails." The creatures melted back into mountain lions, then vanished into the forest like smoke. Tom didn't wait for dawn. He packed in darkness, hands shaking as he stuffed equipment into bags and hiked out by flashlight. The journey that had taken 6 hours in daylight took 2 in his desperate flight. Back home, Tom transcribed everything, then made copies. He sent them to tribal elders, to historians, to anyone who might know what to do. Most didn't respond. Those who did spoke in worried whispers about old bindings failing, about things better left forgotten, stirring in hidden places. Tom never published his findings about the settlement, but he taught his children the protective songs, made them memorize the words their ancestor had written. Because the Cherokee Devil was right, the binding was weakening. And some prisons, once opened, can never be closed again. The livestock disappearances started the following spring. Farmers reported strange kills, organs removed with surgical precision. Children spoke of cats that walked upright in the woods. And Tom Blackwood spent his nights listening for the sound of crying that wasn't quite human, wondering how much time they had left before the old settlement could no longer hold its prisoner. Story 4. The Wampus Cat of Black Rock. Emma Rodriguez had dreamed of studying apex predators since childhood, but nothing in her textbooks prepared her for what killed her research team at Black Rock Mountain. The wildlife biology program at Virginia Tech had placed 5 graduate students at the remote research station to study black bear hibernation patterns. By the 3rd week, only Emma remained. The station sat 12 miles from the nearest road, accessible only by hiking trail or helicopter. It was perfect for studying undisturbed wildlife, solar-powered, with satellite internet and enough supplies for a 3-month stay. Emma's team had settled into a routine of checking trail cameras, collecting scat samples, and tracking tagged bears through the dense mountain forest. The first anomaly appeared on camera 7, positioned near a natural spring where animals gathered. Emma was reviewing footage when she stopped, rewound, and stared at the screen. Something massive had triggered the motion sensor at 3:17 a.m., but the infrared image made no sense. The creature walked on 6 legs, front pair, middle pair, back pair, moving with feline grace despite its size. Based on the surrounding trees, it had to be the size of a small horse. "Jake, come look at this," she called to her teammate. Jake studied the footage, frowning. Camera malfunction? Double exposure? But the timestamp was clean, the image clear despite its impossibility. They marked it as an anomaly and continued their work. That night, something destroyed camera 7 along with cameras 3, 9, and 12. Not just knocked down, shredded, twisted metal and plastic scattered across the forest floor. "Mountain lion?" suggested David, another team member, examining the claw marks that had gouged inch-deep grooves in solid steel. Emma measured the marks. The spacing was wrong for any known predator. Too wide, too deep, and arranged in patterns that suggested 6 claws per paw instead of 4 or 5. She took photos, collected samples, tried to make sense of evidence that contradicted everything she knew about Appalachian wildlife. The second night, it came for their equipment shed. Emma woke to the sound of metal screaming, the reinforced door peeling back like aluminum foil. Through her window, she glimpsed something that would have been beautiful if it wasn't so wrong. Tawny fur rippled with muscle, 6 legs moving in perfect coordination, a tail that split into 2 halfway down its length. The head turned toward her window, revealing eyes that reflected light in colors that shouldn't exist. The team huddled in the main building as the creature methodically destroyed their research equipment. Satellite dish, generator backup, ATVs, anything that might connect them to the outside world or help them leave. It was intelligent, systematic. When dawn came, they were effectively stranded. "We hike out," Jake decided. "All of us together, it's 12 miles to the road." They made it 3 miles. The attack came from above. Sarah, walking point, simply vanished, pulled into the canopy with barely a scream. They found her pack 20 feet up, wrapped around a branch. They never found Sarah. The thing stalked them back to the station, always visible at the edge of perception. Zake's legs made it impossibly agile, able to move through terrain that should have slowed it. Emma counted the gates, walking, trotting, that horrible flowing run that covered ground faster than any vehicle could manage on these mountain paths. David disappeared that night, pulled through a window that should have been too small for a person to fit through. His screams echoed for exactly 13 seconds before cutting off. Jake broke the next morning, trying to run for the trail. Emma watched from the station as something erupted from the earth itself. The creature had been hiding underground, waiting. Jake made it 50 yards. Alone now, Emma barricaded herself in the station's reinforced storage room. She had food, water, and the emergency radio that might work if she could boost the signal. But first, she needed to understand what was hunting her. The station's limited library included local folklore, and in a water-damaged book from the 1800s, she found it. The Wampus Cat, a creature born from Cherokee legend, a woman who had spied on sacred ceremonies, cursed to walk as a 6-legged cat for her transgression. But the details in the book didn't match what Emma had seen. This thing wasn't cursed or tragic. It was perfectly adapted, an apex predator that had evolved in isolation, developing intelligence to match its physical superiority. On the 4th night alone, it spoke. Emma. Her name came from everywhere and nowhere, a sound that bypassed her ears and appeared directly in her mind. "You study predators. Study me." She peered through the reinforced window. It sat in the clearing, all 6 legs folded beneath it like a monstrous sphinx. This close, she could see details that defied classification. The fur wasn't just fur. It was almost metallic, shifting between colors like oil on water. The extra legs weren't deformities, but perfect evolution, each muscle group precisely developed. "What are you?" she whispered. "Older than your names for things, smarter than your books allow. We were here before you carved your first roads, and we'll be here when the mountains reclaim them." "We?" The creature's mouth stretched into something like a smile. "Did you think I was unique? We've learned to hide, to hunt carefully. Your team was an exception. You placed yourselves too deep in our territory." Emma's mind raced. A population of apex predators, intelligent and hidden, living in the deep mountains. It rewrote everything about ecosystem dynamics, evolution, the very nature of what might exist in unexplored wilderness. "Will you kill me?" "Perhaps. Or perhaps you'll be smart enough to leave and never speak of this. We've survived by being legend, not fact. Your choice." The next morning, the path to the trail was clear. Emma's destroyed equipment had been arranged to create a clear message: leave now or join the others. She packed minimal supplies, leaving behind her research, her data, everything that might prove what she'd seen. The hike out took 8 hours. Every step she felt watched. Twice she glimpsed movement in the trees, not one creature but 3, pacing her like an honor guard or a warning. Emma reached civilization and reported a tragic equipment malfunction, gas leak, explosion. No survivors but her, thrown clear by luck. The authorities found no bodies at the station. Animals, they concluded, had scattered the remains. Emma didn't correct them. She left wildlife biology, became a park ranger in Florida, where the land was flat and the mysteries manageable. But sometimes, reading reports of missing hikers in the Appalachians, she wondered if someone else had wandered too deep, studied too closely, learned truths that the mountains preferred to keep. The Wampus Cat had given her a choice. Every day she kept silent was a day she chose to live. Emma Rodriguez had dreamed of studying apex predators since childhood, but nothing prepared her for what killed her research team at Black Rock Mountain. The wildlife biology program had placed 5 graduate students at the remote station to study black bear hibernation. By the 3rd week, only Emma remained. The station sat 12 miles from the nearest road, accessible only by hiking trail, perfect for studying undisturbed wildlife, solar-powered, with satellite internet and supplies for 3 months. Emma's team had settled into routines of checking trail cameras and tracking tagged bears through the dense Virginia forest. The first anomaly appeared on camera 7. Emma was reviewing footage when she froze, rewound, and stared. Something massive had triggered the motion sensor at 3:17 a.m. The infrared image showed a creature walking on 6 legs, front pair, middle pair, back pair, moving with feline grace, despite being horse-sized. "Jake, look at this," she called. Jake studied the footage. Camera malfunction? But the image was clear despite its impossibility. That night, something destroyed cameras 3, 7, 9, and 12. Not just damaged, shredded, twisted metal scattered across the forest floor. Emma measured the claw marks. Too wide, too deep, arranged in patterns suggesting 6 claws per paw instead of 4 or 5. The spacing was wrong for any known predator. The second night, it came for their equipment shed. Emma woke to metal screaming, the reinforced door peeling back like foil. Through her window, she glimpsed something that would have been beautiful if it wasn't terrifying. Tawny fur rippled with muscle, 6 legs in perfect coordination, a tail that split into 2. Its head turned, revealing eyes that reflected impossible colors. The team huddled inside as the creature destroyed their research equipment. Satellite dish, generator backup, ATVs, anything that might connect them to civilization or help them leave. When dawn came, they were stranded. "We hike out together," Jake decided. 12 miles to the road. They made it 3 miles. Sarah, walking point, vanished, pulled into the canopy with barely a scream. They found her packed 20 feet up, wrapped around a branch. They never found Sarah. The thing stalked them back, always visible at perception's edge. 6 legs made it impossibly agile. David disappeared that night, pulled through a window too small for a person. Jake broke the next morning running for the trail. Emma watched something erupt from the earth. The creature had been waiting underground. Jake made it 50 yards. Alone, Emma barricaded herself in the storage room. In the station's folklore collection, she found it, the Wampus Cat. Cherokee legend spoke of a woman cursed to walk as a 6-legged cat. But this thing wasn't cursed. It was perfectly evolved, an apex predator with intelligence matching its physical superiority. On the 4th night it spoke, "Emma." Her name appeared directly in her mind. "You study predators. Study me." It sat in the clearing, 6 legs folded beneath it like a sphinx. The fur was almost metallic, shifting colors like oil on water. The extra legs weren't deformities but perfect evolution. "What are you?" "Older than your names for things. We were here before your roads, and we'll be here when the mountains reclaim them." "We?" The creature smiled. "Did you think I was unique? We've learned to hide, to hunt carefully. Your team placed yourselves too deep in our territory. A population of hidden apex predators, intelligent and ancient. It rewrote everything about ecosystem dynamics, evolution, the nature of unexplored wilderness. Will you kill me? Perhaps. Or perhaps you'll be smart enough to leave and never speak of this. We've survived by being legend, not fact." The next morning, the path was clear. Her destroyed equipment was arranged as a message, leave or die. Emma packed minimal supplies, abandoning everything that might prove what she'd seen. The hike took 8 hours. Every step felt watched. Twice she glimpsed movement. Not one creature, but 3 pacing her, warning her. Emma reported an equipment malfunction, gas leak, explosion. She was the only survivor, thrown clear by luck. Authorities found no bodies. Animals had scattered the remains, they concluded. She left wildlife biology, became a park ranger in Florida where mysteries were manageable. But reading reports of missing hikers in the Appalachians, she wondered if others had wandered too deep, learned truths the mountains preferred to keep. The Wampus Cat had given her a choice. Every day she kept silent was a day she chose to live. And in the deep forests of Black Rock Mountain, 6-legged shadows continued their ancient hunt, invisible to satellites and trail cameras, waiting for the next group of researchers who might venture too far from the marked paths. Story 5. The Not Deer. James Miller had hunted the Kentucky mountains for 30 years, knew every deer trail and bedding area within 50 miles of his cabin. That's why he noticed when the deer started acting wrong. It began the second week of October. James was in his tree stand before dawn, bow ready, watching the usual crossing where a game trail met the creek. The first deer appeared right on schedule, a young doe picking her way through the underbrush. But something made him hesitate instead of drawing his bow. The deer was walking wrong, not injured, not sick, just wrong. Its legs moved in a sequence that hurt to watch, as if it was thinking about each step. When it reached the creek, it stood there staring at the water like it had forgotten what to do. Then it stepped in with its front legs and walked upstream on its hind legs for 20 yards before crossing. James lowered his bow, unsettled. In 3 decades of hunting, he had never seen a deer move like that. He climbed down and headed back to his cabin, the image stuck in his mind like a splinter. That evening, he sat on his porch cleaning his rifle when movement caught his eye. 3 deer stood at the edge of his property just inside the tree line. They weren't grazing or moving through, just standing there, watching his cabin. As the sun set, he counted more. 7, 12, 20 deer, all perfectly still, all staring at his home. He went inside and locked the door, something he'd never done in years of living alone in the mountains. Through the window, he could see their eyes reflecting his porch light. They stood there all night. When dawn came, they were gone, but he found hoof prints in impossible places, on his porch rails, on the cabin walls 10 feet up, on his roof. The third night, James woke to find a deer face pressed against his bedroom window. It wasn't breathing fog on the glass. It wasn't blinking. It just stared with eyes that looked too aware, too calculating. When he shouted and banged on the window, it smiled. Deer don't have the muscles to smile, but this one did, lips pulling back to reveal human teeth mixed with herbivore molars. He grabbed his rifle and ran outside, but the thing was gone. Only the prints remained, and when he looked closer, he realized they weren't quite right. The hooves were there, but with too many joints, like fingers trying to mimic the shape. James drove to town the next morning, tried to explain to other hunters what he'd seen. They laughed it off. Stress, isolation, maybe early onset cabin fever. But old Tom Brennan pulled him aside after the others left. "My granddad saw something like that back in '53, Tom whispered. "Called them not deer. Said they show up sometimes, things that look almost right but ain't." He locked himself in the root cellar for 3 days till they moved on. "You might want to consider leaving for a bit." But James was stubborn, had lived in these mountains too long to be run off by weird animals. He went back to his cabin, loaded every weapon he owned, and settled in to wait. They came at dusk. Not sneaking or stalking, walking upright on their hind legs like awkward children learning to walk. Their front legs hung at their sides like arms, hooves clicking together in rhythms that almost sounded like language. He counted 40 of them, surrounding his cabin in a perfect circle. One approached his porch, its movement becoming more human with each step. When it reached the door, it knocked, 3 measured raps that no hoof should be able to produce. Then it spoke, and James felt his sanity crack a little. James. The voice came from a throat never meant for human speech, wet and distorted. "We learned your shape, walked in your footsteps, tasted your thoughts in the salt licks you left. We want to learn more." "What are you?" James asked through the door, rifle trembling in his hands. "We are trying to be. Your kind makes patterns in the world. We follow them, learn them, become them. But the shape is hard. The walking is hard. Teach us to be better at being you." Another deer joined the first, this one managing an almost perfect human stance. "We watched you become deer when you hunt. Smell like them, move like them, think like them. We can become you the same way. Already we dream your dreams. Soon we will walk your roads, speak your words, live your lives." James understood then, with the clarity of true terror. These things weren't deer. They were something else, something that copied forms and behaviors, learning through mimicry. And they had been studying humans through their interactions with deer, the hunters who tried to think like their prey. "Get away from my home," he said, voice steadier than he felt. "I won't teach you anything." The not deer tilted its head at an impossible angle. "Then we learn the hard way. Through wearing, through being. Your shape will fit better when you're not in it." They rushed the cabin then, dozens of almost deer moving on legs that bent wrong, reaching with hooves that had sprouted fingers. James fired through the windows, watched them fall and rise again, their bodies adjusting, adapting, becoming more human in their movements even as buckshot tore through them. He made it to his truck, tires spinning gravel as not deer threw themselves at the vehicle. In the mirrors, he saw them standing in his driveway, some on 4 legs, some on 2, some caught horribly between. A few had managed almost complete human shapes, naked and wrong, but recognizable as attempts at his own form. James drove through the night, didn't stop until he reached Louisville. He sold the cabin through a lawyer, never went back to collect his belongings. He moved to the city, found work, tried to forget. But sometimes he reads about hikers going missing in those mountains. Sometimes he sees security footage of people walking with gaits that don't quite match human movement. And always, he wonders if the not deer finally figured out how to wear our shapes properly. Because if they did, how would we know? They learned from hunters, after all, and hunters know the most important rule. To catch your prey, you must first become it. Story 6. The Moon-Eyed People. Doctor. Lisa Patterson had excavated dozens of pre-Columbian sites across the southeast, but the cave system in the North Carolina mountains was different. The Cherokee elders who'd finally given permission for the dig had been reluctant, speaking in whispers about the people who lived there before, the ones they'd driven out centuries ago. They couldn't stand the sun, old Mary Crow had told her. Lived in the deep places, came out only at night. We called them the Moon-Eyed People. When our ancestors arrived, we sealed their caves and forgot them. Some things should stay forgotten. But Lisa was a scientist, not given to folklore. The preliminary survey had shown extensive prehistoric habitation, tools, pottery fragments, and strange stone carvings unlike any she'd catalogued before. Her team of 6 graduate students set up camp near the main cave entrance, ready for what should have been a routine excavation. The first sign something was wrong came when they broke through the stone seal. The Cherokee had done more than just block the entrance. They'd filled it with specially chosen rocks covered in symbols, each one placed with deliberate care. Behind the seal, they found warnings carved in multiple languages, Cherokee, Creek, and others Lisa couldn't identify. "Maybe we should document this and reconsider," suggested David, one of her students, photographing the warning stones. Lisa shook her head. "We're archaeologists, not treasure hunters scared by old curses. We document, we study, we learn." The cave system was vast, extending far deeper than ground-penetrating radar had indicated. The main chamber showed clear signs of long-term habitation, sleeping areas, fire pits, what looked like primitive workshops, but everything was wrong for typical prehistoric Native American sites. The tools were too advanced, the pottery too refined, and everywhere those strange carvings that seemed to shift in the LED lights. They set up lights and began cataloging. Sarah, working near what appeared to be a ceremonial area, called out, "Dr. Patterson, you need to see this." The wall was covered in pictographs, but not like any Native American art Lisa knew. These showed tall, thin figures with enormous eyes, clearly depicted as living underground. The images told a story, the figures building, creating, thriving in darkness. Then new people arriving, war, the thin figures retreating deeper, being sealed away. "My God," Lisa breathed. This could rewrite everything we know about pre-Columbian contact. That night, the dreams started. Everyone in camp had the same one. Pale figures with eyes like full moons, watching from the darkness just beyond the light, whispering in a language that predated words. When they woke, they found their equipment had been moved. Cameras turned to face the cave. Laptops opened to files no one had created, filled with symbols that hurt to read. "Pack up," Lisa ordered. "We'll come back with a bigger team, better security." But the cave wouldn't let them leave. Their vehicles wouldn't start. The satellite phone gave only static. The trail they'd hiked in on was gone, as if it had never existed. And as the sun set, they heard movement deep in the cave, shuffling footsteps too many to count. They retreated to the main chamber, set up all their lights in a circle. As darkness fell outside, the sounds grew louder. Then, at the edge of their light, they saw them. The moon-eyed people were exactly as the pictographs showed, 7 feet tall but spindly, with skin so pale it was translucent, showing dark veins beneath. Their eyes were enormous, taking up nearly half their faces, pupils dilated to black pools that reflected the LED lights like mirrors. They moved wrong, joints bending in too many places, fingers too long and too numerous. One stepped forward, and when it spoke, the words appeared in Lisa's mind rather than her ears. "You broke the seal. The Sun Children promised to leave us in peace if we stayed below. You broke the promise." "We didn't know," Lisa said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "We're scholars, we just wanted to learn." "Learn then," the creature said. And suddenly Lisa's mind was full of images, a civilization that predated human memory, driven underground by some ancient catastrophe, centuries of adaptation to the deep places, bodies changing, evolving for darkness. The arrival of the Cherokee, wars fought in shadow, a treaty sealed in stone and blood. "We kept the bargain," the moon-eyed person continued. "Stayed below, let the Sun Children have the surface. But the seal is broken. The treaty is void." More of them emerged from the depths, dozens, then hundreds. They moved through the camp, touching equipment with those wrong-jointed fingers. Where they touched, technology failed. Batteries drained, circuits fried, metal corroded as if aged centuries in seconds. "Please," Lisa begged. "We'll leave. We'll seal the cave again. No one will know." The lead creature tilted its massive head. "No. You wanted to learn our history. You will. You will stay and document everything. Every chamber, every carving, every word of our story. And when you're done, when you've recorded the truth of the moon-eyed people, then we will decide if the Sun Children deserve to remember us." They were prisoners, Lisa realized, but prisoners with a job to do. The moon-eyed people brought them deeper into the cave system, showing them wonders and horrors that predated human civilization. Cities carved from living rock. Technologies that worked on principles science hadn't discovered. Art that told stories of stars falling and suns dying. Days blended into nights. Not that it mattered in the eternal darkness of the caves. Lisa's team documented everything, filled hard drives with data that would revolutionize archaeology. The moon-eyed people fed them strange fungi that glowed softly and tasted of forgotten earth. Slowly, the humans began to change too. Their eyes grew more sensitive to light. Their skin paled. Their dreams became shared visions of the deep places. On the 30th day, or perhaps the 40th, time had lost meaning. The leader came to Lisa again. "You have learned. You have recorded. Now, choose. Return to the surface and speak our truth, or stay and join us in the deep places. Some of your kind have chosen to stay before. They find the darkness peaceful." Lisa looked at her team. Sarah's eyes had grown noticeably larger. David rarely blinked anymore. They'd all stopped talking about the surface, stopped mentioning the sun. The choice, she realized, might already be made. "If we go," she asked carefully, "what happens to the moon-eyed people?" "We rise," it said simply. "The treaty is broken. The seal is open. We have waited so long in the deep places. Perhaps it is time to see if the surface has room for us again." Lisa made her choice. She led her team out of the caves, blinking in dawn light that burned their changed eyes. They sealed the entrance as best they could, but they all knew it wouldn't hold. The moon-eyed people had waited centuries. They could wait a little longer. The data they brought back should have changed everything. But when Lisa tried to access the files, they were corrupted, showing only those painful symbols. The photos were washed out, showing only suggestions of shapes. Only their memories remained clear, too clear, keeping them awake at night with visions of pale figures moving in the darkness below. And sometimes, reading reports of unexplained disappearances in cave systems across Appalachia, Lisa wonders if the Moon-Eyed people decided not to wait after all. If perhaps they're already rising, one cave at a time, reclaiming a world they lost to the sun so long ago. Dr. Lisa Patterson had excavated dozens of pre-Columbian sites, but the cave system in the North Carolina mountains was different. The Cherokee elders who'd granted permission had been reluctant, whispering about the people who lived there before. They couldn't stand the sun, old Mary Crow had said, lived in the deep places. We called them the Moon-Eyed people. When our ancestors arrived, we sealed their caves. Some things should stay forgotten. But Lisa was a scientist. The preliminary survey showed extensive prehistoric habitation, tools, pottery, and strange carvings, unlike any she'd seen. Her team of 6 graduate students set up camp near the main entrance. The first warning came when they broke through the stone seal. The Cherokee hadn't just blocked the entrance. They'd filled it with specially chosen rocks covered in symbols. Behind the seal, warnings in multiple languages covered the walls. Maybe we should reconsider, David suggested, photographing the stones. We're archaeologists, Lisa said. We document and learn. The cave system extended far deeper than radar had shown. Everything was wrong for typical prehistoric sites. Tools too advanced, pottery too refined, and those strange carvings that seemed to shift in the LED lights. Sarah called from a ceremonial area. Dr. Patterson, look at this. The wall showed tall, thin figures with enormous eyes living underground. The pictographs told a story. The figures thriving in darkness. New people arriving, war. The thin figures retreating deeper, being sealed away. That night, everyone had the same dream. Pale figures with moon-like eyes watching from darkness. They woke to find equipment moved, cameras turned toward the cave, laptops open to files filled with painful symbols. Pack up, Lisa ordered. We'll return with better security. But their vehicles wouldn't start. The satellite phone gave only static. The trail they'd hiked had vanished. As sunset approached, shuffling sounds emerged from the cave depths. They set up lights in a circle. At the edge of illumination they appeared. The Moon-Eyed people stood 7 feet tall, spindly, with translucent skin showing dark veins. Their eyes took up half their faces, pupils dilated to black mirrors. They moved wrong, joints bending in too many places. One stepped forward, words appearing in Lisa's mind. You broke the seal. The Sun Children promised to leave us in peace. You broke the promise. We didn't know, Lisa said. We're scholars. Learn then. Images flooded her mind. A civilization predating human memory, driven underground, centuries of adaptation. The Cherokee arriving, wars in shadow, a treaty sealed in stone. More emerged from the depths, hundreds of them. They touched equipment with wrong-jointed fingers. Technology failed instantly. Batteries drained, circuits fried, metal corroding. Please, we'll leave, we'll reseal the cave. No, you wanted our history. You'll document everything, every chamber, every carving. Then we decide if the Sun Children deserve to remember us. They were prisoners with a purpose. The Moon-Eyed people led them deeper, showing cities carved from rock, impossible technologies, art depicting fallen stars. Lisa's team documented everything while being fed glowing fungi that tasted of Earth. Days blended together. The humans began changing. Eyes grew light-sensitive, skin paled. Dreams became shared visions. On the 40th day, or was it 50, the leader returned. Choose. Return to the surface with our truth, or stay in the deep places. Some of your kind have stayed before. They find darkness. Peaceful. Lisa looked at her team. Sarah's eyes had grown larger. David rarely blinked. They'd stopped mentioning the sun. If we go, what happens? We rise. The treaty is broken. Perhaps the surface has room for us again. Lisa led her team out, dawnlight burning their changed eyes. They sealed the entrance knowing it wouldn't hold. The data they brought back was corrupted. Files showing only painful symbols, photos washed out. Only memories remained clear, keeping them awake with visions of pale figures in darkness. Reading reports of cave disappearances across Appalachia, Lisa wonders if the moon-eyed people decided not to wait. If they're already rising, one cave at a time, reclaiming a world lost to the sun. Story 7. The Snarly Yow. Mike Thompson had driven the South Mountain roads for 23 years, hauling freight through Maryland's dark passes when most folks had sense enough to stay home. He'd seen everything these mountains could throw at a trucker. Black ice, fog thick as cotton, deer jumping out like suicide bombers. But nothing had prepared him for the dog. It was a Tuesday night in November, the kind where cold rain turned to sleet without warning. Mike was hauling a load of electronics to Baltimore, pushing to make his delivery window. The engine started acting up around midnight, just past the old Lutheran cemetery where Route 40 wound through its tightest curves. The temperature gauge spiked first, then dropped to nothing. The radio cut to static, and his CB went dead. Mike cursed, looking for a place to pull over on the narrow mountain road. That's when he saw it in the headlights. A dog. Massive, black as the space between stars, standing dead center in his lane. Mike hit the brakes, felt the trailer start to jackknife on the slick road, but the dog didn't move, didn't even flinch as 40 tons of steel bore down on it. Mike braced for impact, for the sickening thump and the inspection that would follow. Instead, the dog passed through his truck like smoke, not around it, not under it, through it. In his side mirror, he watched the thing reform behind his trailer, those eyes glowing like hot coals in the dark. He kept driving, hands white-knuckled on the wheel. The engine smoothed out, gauges returned to normal. Mike told himself he'd imagined it. Tired eyes, too much coffee, maybe a patch of fog. But at the next curve, there it was again. Same dog, same position, same burning eyes. This time, Mike didn't brake. He drove straight through it, felt a cold that had nothing to do with November seep through the cab. The dog reformed in his mirrors again, and now it was following. Not running. It didn't need to run. It moved like bad film editing, disappearing from one spot and appearing closer. Always those eyes locked on his mirrors. Mike grabbed his phone to call dispatch, but the screen showed only static, like an old television tuned to a dead channel. The mile markers weren't making sense either. He'd passed marker 47 3 times now, but his odometer kept climbing. The dog appeared beside his window, keeping pace at 60 miles per hour without its legs moving. This close, Mike could see details that made his stomach clench. The fur wasn't black. It was an absence, like looking into a hole cut in the shape of a dog. The eyes weren't reflecting light. They were creating it, burning from somewhere that wasn't part of any world Mike understood. It spoke without opening its mouth, the words appearing in the frost on his windshield. "Pull over!" Mike laughed, high and hysterical. Like hell. The dog passed through the door, and suddenly it was in the cab with him. The smell hit first. Sulfur and old graves and something else. Something that made Mike think of roadkill left in the sun. It sat in the passenger seat like it belonged there, too large for the space but fitting anyway. "You're going to crash," it said, and this time the voice came from everywhere, vibrating through the seat and the steering wheel. "In 30 seconds you're going to miss the curve at Devil's Corner. Your trailer will go over, you'll burn." Mike's hands moved on their own, trying to slow down, but his foot stayed heavy on the accelerator. The speedometer climbed past 70, past 80. Too fast for these curves, too fast for the sleet-slick road. 20 seconds, the dog said. "I've sat at this crossroads for 200 years, watched thousands pass, warned the ones I could. You're not the first Thompson I've tried to save." That got Mike's attention. "Thompson? Your great-great-grandfather, 1897. His horse spooked right where your engine failed. He didn't listen either." The dog's eyes flared brighter. 10 seconds. Mike saw Devil's Corner coming up, the guardrail twisted from countless accidents. His foot finally obeyed, moving to the brake, but the wheels locked on the ice, the trailer pushing him forward, everything happening in slow motion and too fast at once. 5 seconds. The wheel wouldn't respond. Mike fought it, muscles straining, watching the guardrail approach with terrible certainty. 3. The dog placed one massive paw on the wheel. 2. Mike felt the truck change direction, impossibly against all laws of physics and momentum. The trailer swung wide but held, tires screaming as they found purchase on dry pavement that shouldn't exist. 1. They made the curve. Barely, impossibly, but they made it. Mike's heart hammered as he brought the rig to a stop at the next pull-off, hands shaking too hard to hold the wheel. When he looked at the passenger seat, the dog was gone. Only the smell remained, and words drawn in the condensation on the window. Thompson, luck runs out, drive careful. Mike sat there until dawn, engine idling, watching the road. When the sun finally broke over the mountains, he saw them. Skid marks leading straight through the guardrail at Devil's Corner. Fresh ones, the kind his truck would have made if he hadn't turned. He made his delivery 6 hours late, told dispatch the engine trouble had been worse than expected. But he kept the real story to himself mostly. Sometimes at truck stops along Route 40, he'd hear other drivers talking. Stories about a black dog that appears on South Mountain. The snarly yow, they called it. A demon, a ghost, a guardian. Nobody agreed on what it was. Mike knew the truth was probably all three. He also knew he'd never drive that stretch at night again, not without checking his mirrors for eyes like burning coals. And sometimes, when young drivers asked about the safest routes through Maryland, he'd tell them to respect South Mountain, to watch for black dogs, to listen when something impossible tries to save your life. Because on those winding mountain roads, where the crossroads meet and old things linger, sometimes the only thing standing between you and the guardrail is a creature that shouldn't exist. And Thompson luck, whatever that means, only stretches so far. Story 8. The Flatwoods Monster. Ashley and David Cooper had bought the old farmhouse in Braxton County as their escape from Charleston's chaos. 20 acres of West Virginia wilderness, a century-old house with character, and neighbors far enough away to guarantee peace. They'd been there 6 months when the light started. It was a Thursday evening in early September. David was fixing the barn door while Ashley tended her vegetable garden. The sun had just dipped below the tree line when she noticed their German shepherd Max staring at the sky, a low growl building in his throat. "What is it, boy?" Ashley followed his gaze and froze. 3 lights moved across the darkening sky in perfect formation, too slow for planes, too bright for satellites. They pulsed in rhythm, white, green, red, like a heartbeat made of light. "David, come look at this." Her husband emerged from the barn, wrench in hand. The lights had stopped directly above their property, hovering maybe 1,000 feet up. As they watched, one light separated from the others and began descending toward the hill behind their house. "Military exercise?" David suggested, but his voice carried no conviction. Braxton County wasn't near any bases, and these lights moved like nothing with engines. The descending light disappeared behind the tree line. A moment later, the forest lit up with a sickly green glow that made Ashley's eyes water. Max went wild, barking and snarling at something they couldn't see. Then the smell hit, a mixture of sulfur and hot metal that coated the back of their throats. "Get inside," David said, grabbing Ashley's hand. They ran for the house, Max reluctantly following, his attention still fixed on the glowing hillside. From their kitchen window, they watched the green light pulse and shift. Other animals were reacting now. Cattle from the neighboring farm bellowing, nightbirds shrieking, every dog within miles adding to the cacophony. Then, as suddenly as it began, the light vanished. The remaining 2 lights in the sky accelerated impossibly fast and disappeared toward the east. "Should we call someone?" Ashley asked, reaching for her phone. No signal. The landline was dead too, giving only a strange humming that seemed to sync with the throbbing in their temples. David loaded his shotgun, more for comfort than any belief it would help. "We'll check it out in the morning, together, with the truck." But morning was too far away. Around midnight, Ashley woke to Max pawing at their bedroom door, whimpering. The room was bathed in that same green light, seeping through the curtains like poisonous moonlight. David was already awake, standing at the window. "Ashley," he whispered. "Look." She joined him, peering through a gap in the curtains, and had to clamp a hand over her mouth to stifle a scream. It stood at the edge of their property, where the yard met the forest, 10 feet tall, maybe more, wearing what looked like a dark metallic dress that flared at the bottom, giving it a cone-like shape. But it was the head that made Ashley's mind rebel. A red, spade-shaped horror with glowing green eyes set in a face that seemed to shift and writhe. Behind the head, a pointed hood or crown added another foot to its height. The thing glided forward without walking, its dress-like lower half hovering inches above the ground. Green mist seeped from beneath it, killing the grass in a perfect line as it approached their house. When it reached the vegetable garden Ashley had worked so hard on, the plants withered and blackened at its presence. Max had stopped whimpering. He stood rigid, hackles raised, a continuous growl vibrating from his chest. David's hands were steady on the shotgun, but Ashley could see the fear in his eyes. The creature stopped 20 feet from their porch. Its head tilted, and suddenly Ashley felt pressure in her skull, like fingers probing at her thoughts. Images flashed through her mind, star charts she couldn't read, planets she'd never seen, technologies that hurt to comprehend. And underneath it all, a desperate hunger, a need for something Earth could provide. David must have felt it too, because he gasped and staggered back from the window. The movement drew the creature's attention. Those green eyes flared brighter, and the Cooper's house filled with noxious mist that seeped through every crack and seal. Ashley's throat burned. Her eyes streamed tears that felt like acid on her cheeks. Beside her, David was coughing, doubled over, the shotgun forgotten on the floor. Max howled once, then collapsed, his breathing labored. Through the pain and disorientation, Ashley saw more shapes emerging from the forest. 3, 4, 5 more of the creatures, all gliding toward their house in that horrible, hovering motion. The mist grew thicker, and with it came waves of nausea that dropped her to her knees. This is how we die, she thought, poisoned by things from another world. But death didn't come. Instead, the creatures surrounded their house in a perfect circle. The lead entity raised appendages that might have been arms, and the others mirrored the gesture. The green mist swirled faster, creating a vortex with the farmhouse at its center. Through her pain-blurred vision, Ashley saw impossible things. The walls of their house became transparent, as if the creature's gaze could pierce solid matter. She watched them examining everything, the wiring in the walls, the pipes, the very atoms that made up their home, learning, cataloging, understanding. Then, as suddenly as they'd come, they left. The creatures glided back toward the forest, their green light fading with distance. The mist dissipated, leaving only the acrid smell and dead vegetation as proof of their visit. In the sky, 3 lights appeared, hovered for a moment as if in farewell, then shot away at impossible speed. Ashley and David huddled together on the floor, gasping clean air, checking on Max, who was slowly recovering. When dawn finally came, they ventured outside to survey the damage. A perfect circle of dead earth surrounded their house, 50 feet in diameter. Every plant was not just dead, but molecularly changed, turned to a gray, crystalline substance that crumbled at the touch. They left that afternoon packing only essentials. The house stood empty for 3 years before anyone would buy it, and then only out-of-state investors who didn't know the story. But Ashley and David knew the truth. They'd been studied, catalogued, evaluated by something that saw Earth as just another stop on an unimaginable journey. They settled in Colorado, far from West Virginia's hills. But sometimes, when thunderstorms light the sky in unusual colors, Ashley remembers the pressure of alien thoughts in her mind. And sometimes, David wakes to find her standing at the window, watching the sky, waiting to see if those 3 lights will return. Because the Flatwoods monster and its kind aren't done with Earth. They're explorers, scientists in their own alien way. And what they're looking for, what they need from our world, remains a mystery that keeps the Coopers checking the night sky, wondering if tonight will be the night the visitors return to finish what they started. Ashley and David Cooper bought the old farmhouse in Braxton County as their escape from Charleston. 20 acres of West Virginia wilderness, perfect isolation. They'd been there 6 months when the lights started. Thursday evening, early September. David was fixing the barn while Ashley tended her garden. Their German shepherd, Max, began growling at the sky. 3 lights moved overhead in perfect formation, pulsing white, green, red, like a heartbeat made of light. "David, look at this." The The light stopped directly above their property. One separated and descended toward the hill behind their house. David suggested military exercises, but these moved like nothing with engines. The descending light vanished behind the trees. The forest erupted in sickly green light that made their eyes water. Then came the smell, sulfur and hot metal coating their throats. Max went wild, barking at something invisible. They ran inside as every animal for miles reacted, cattle bellowing, birds shrieking, dogs howling. The green light pulsed, then vanished. The remaining skylights accelerated impossibly fast and disappeared eastward. Their phones had no signal. The landline hummed strangely, syncing with the throbbing in their temples. David loaded his shotgun, planning to investigate in the morning, but midnight brought Max pawing at their door, whimpering. Green light seeped through the curtains. At the window, Ashley stifled a scream. It stood where yard met forest, 10 feet tall, wearing what looked like a dark metallic dress that flared into a cone shape. The head was a red, spade-shaped horror with glowing green eyes, topped by a pointed hood. It glided forward without walking, hovering above the ground. Green mist seeped from beneath it, killing grass in a perfect line. Their vegetable garden withered and blackened at its approach. The creature stopped 20 feet from their porch. Ashley felt pressure in her skull, alien thoughts probing her mind. Star charts she couldn't read, unknown planets, incomprehensible technologies. Underneath, a desperate hunger for something Earth possessed. David staggered back from the window. The movement drew its attention. Those green eyes flared and noxious mist filled their house through every crack. Ashley's throat burned, eyes streaming acid tears. David doubled over, coughing. Max howled and collapsed. More shapes emerged from the forest, 5 additional creatures gliding toward the house. They formed a perfect circle around the property. The lead entity raised what might have been arms. The others mirrored the gesture. Green mist swirled into a vortex. Through pain-blurred vision, Ashley saw the impossible. Their house walls became transparent to the creature's gaze. They examined everything: wiring, pipes, the very atoms of their home. Learning, cataloging, understanding. Then they left. The creatures glided back to the forest, their light fading. 3 lights appeared in the sky, hovered briefly, then shot away at impossible speed. Ashley and David huddled together, gasping clean air, checking Max, who slowly recovered. Dawn revealed a perfect circle of dead earth surrounding their house. Every plant had been molecularly changed into gray, crystalline substance that crumbled when touched. They left that afternoon with only essentials. The house stood empty for 3 years before out-of-state investors bought it, ignorant of its history. But the Coopers knew they'd been studied by something that saw Earth as just another stop on an unimaginable journey. They settled in Colorado, far from West Virginia's hills. But during thunderstorms with unusual colors, Ashley remembers alien thoughts in her mind. David sometimes finds her at windows, watching the sky, waiting to see if those lights will return. Because the Flatwoods monster and its kind aren't finished with Earth. They're explorers, alien scientists, and what they need from our world remains a mystery that keeps the Coopers scanning the night sky, wondering if tonight the visitors will return to complete their work. Story 9. The Hopkinsville Goblins. Carl Henderson had spent 47 years in the coal mines before his lungs forced him to retire. Now at 67, he lived alone in his family's old house in the eastern Kentucky mountains, far enough from civilization that he could see every star on clear nights. He liked the solitude, the quiet, the predictable rhythm of mountain life, until the night the goblins came. It started with small things that October evening, objects in his peripheral vision that weren't there when he turned to look, his coffee mug sliding 3 inches across the table while he read his newspaper. The cats, all 4 of them, suddenly refusing to come inside, huddling instead under the porch, like they'd done during that bad thunderstorm last spring. Carl dismissed it as old age playing tricks until he heard the scratching. Not mice in the walls. He knew that sound. This was deliberate, rhythmic, like fingernails on wood, but coming from inside the walls themselves. It started in the kitchen, moved to the living room, then surrounded him in the den where he sat with his father's old .22 rifle across his lap. "Who's there?" he called out, feeling foolish. The scratching stopped. In the silence that followed, Carl heard something that made his blood run cold, giggling. High-pitched, childlike, but wrong in a way that made his teeth ache. It came from everywhere and nowhere, rising and falling like a demented symphony. The power went out. Not unusual in the mountains, but the timing made Carl grip his rifle tighter. In the darkness he saw them, eyes glowing silver-white, dozens of pairs peering through every window of his house. They blinked in unison, a synchronized display that spoke of intelligence and coordination. Carl had faced cave-ins, gas leaks, and the constant threat of black lung. He wasn't about to be scared off by some unusual prowlers. He grabbed his flashlight and headed for the front door, rifle ready. The moment he stepped onto the porch, he understood this was different from any threat he'd known. They stood about 3 feet tall, with oversized heads on spindly bodies. Their skin was gray-green, textured like old leather. The ears were enormous, pointed, almost comically large. But the eyes, those glowing silver orbs, held an intelligence that was decidedly not comical. They didn't flee from his light. Instead, they tilted their heads in unison, studying him like scientists examining a specimen. "Get off my property," Carl said, voice steadier than his hands. One of them stepped forward. When it spoke, the words appeared in Carl's mind rather than his ears, a sensation like ice water dripping down his spine. "We've been here longer than your property lines, Coleman, longer than your houses, your mines, your roads." Carl raised the rifle. The creature didn't flinch. Instead, it smiled, revealing rows of needle-sharp teeth. "Metal and fire won't help. We're not here to harm. We're here to reclaim." Reclaim what? The giggling started again, from all of them now. Behind Carl, inside his house, he heard destruction, furniture overturning, glass breaking, the systematic dismantling of his ordered life. He spun around, but the door slammed shut before he could enter. Through the windows, he saw more of them inside, moving with impossible speed, their forms blurring as they danced through his home. "For generations, you dug into our places," the lead creature continued telepathically. "Collapsed our tunnels, poisoned our water, drove us deeper. Now the mines are closing. Your kind is leaving. We're taking back what was ours." Carl understood then. The abandoned mines that honeycombed these mountains, the shafts his grandfather had dug, his father had expanded, and he had worked. They weren't just empty holes. They were highways for something older, something that had waited patiently for the coal industry to die. The siege lasted all night. The creatures didn't attack him directly, but they made his house unlivable. Every time he tried to enter, invisible forces pushed him back. He watched through windows as they methodically destroyed everything that made the structure human. Family photos dissolved at their touch. Furniture aged decades in seconds. Walls began to warp and bend. By dawn, Carl's house looked like it had been abandoned for 50 years. The roof sagged, windows were clouded with age, and vines that shouldn't have been able to grow overnight covered the exterior. The creatures were gone, but their message was clear. Carl found his truck still worked. They'd left him a way out. As he drove down the mountain road, he saw other houses in similar states. The Thompson's place, the old miner's lodge, even the abandoned company store, all aged beyond recognition overnight. In his rearview mirror, he caught glimpses of them, the Hopkinsville goblins, standing in doorways and windows, watching his retreat. He tried to warn others in town, but who would believe him? Creatures from the mines reclaiming the mountains. The sheriff drove up to investigate and found nothing but abandoned properties that looked like they'd been empty for decades. No signs of violence, no evidence of Carl's 40 years of life in that house. Carl moved in with his daughter in Lexington, never to return to the mountains. But he followed the news. One by one, the old mining families left eastern Kentucky. Official reasons varied: economic opportunities elsewhere, health concerns, family obligations. But Carl knew the truth. The goblins were patient but persistent. They wanted their mountains back, and they were willing to wait for every last human to understand the message. Sometimes, lying awake in his suburban bedroom, Carl wondered about the deeper mines, the ones that went down thousands of feet. What else lived down there? What else was waiting for humanity to retreat? The coal industry had dug deep into ancient places, and now those places were pushing back. The mountains belong to older things than men. The Hopkinsville goblins were just the beginning, the polite ones who gave warnings and left escape routes. Carl feared what might come next, what might rise from the deepest shafts when the last human finally left the hollows for good. In eastern Kentucky, the mines stood empty, but they were far from abandoned. Silver eyes watched from the darkness, and patient voices giggled in frequencies human ears couldn't quite detect, planning for a future where the mountains were theirs once more. Carl Henderson had spent 47 years in the coal mines before his lungs forced retirement. Now, 67, he lived alone in his family's house in the eastern Kentucky mountains, far from civilization. He liked the solitude until the night the goblins came. It started small that October evening, objects moving in peripheral vision, his coffee mug sliding across the table, all 4 cats refusing to come inside, huddling under the porch instead. Then came the scratching. Not mice, this was deliberate, rhythmic, like fingernails inside the walls themselves. It started in the kitchen, moved through the house, surrounding him in the den where he sat with his father's .22 rifle. The scratching stopped. In the silence, Carl heard giggling, high-pitched, childlike, but wrong. It came from everywhere, rising and falling like demented music. The power died. In darkness, he saw them, dozens of silver-white eyes peering through every window, blinking in unison. Carl grabbed his flashlight and headed outside, rifle ready. On the porch, he understood this was unlike any threat he'd known. They stood 3 feet tall, with oversized heads on spindly bodies. Gray-green skin textured like leather, enormous pointed ears, but those glowing silver eyes held undeniable intelligence. They didn't flee from his light, instead tilting their heads in unison, studying him. "Get off my property," Carl said. One stepped forward. Words appeared in Carl's mind like ice water down his spine. "We've been here longer than your property lines, Coalman. Longer than your mines, your roads." Carl raised the rifle. The creature smiled, showing needle-sharp teeth. "Metal won't help. We're here to reclaim." "Reclaim what?" Giggling erupted from all of them. Behind Carl, inside his house, destruction began, furniture overturning, glass breaking. He spun, but the door slammed shut. Through windows, he saw more inside, moving impossibly fast. "You dug into our places," the creature continued telepathically. "Collapsed our tunnels, poisoned our water. Now the mines close, your kind leaves. We take back what was ours." Carl understood. The abandoned mines honeycombing these mountains weren't empty. They were highways for something that had waited for the coal industry to die. The siege lasted all night. They didn't attack directly, but made his house unlivable. Invisible forces prevented entry. He watched through windows as they destroyed everything human. Photos dissolved at their touch, furniture aged decades in seconds, walls warped. By dawn, Carl's house looked abandoned for 50 years. Roof sagging, windows clouded, overnight vines covering everything. The creatures were gone, their message clear. His truck still worked. They'd left him an escape. Driving down the mountain, he saw other houses similarly aged. In his mirrors, he glimpsed them watching from doorways. He warned others in town, but who'd believe him? The sheriff found only properties that looked decades abandoned. No violence, no evidence of Carl's 40 years there. Carl moved to Lexington with his daughter, but he followed the news. One by one, mining families left eastern Kentucky. Official reasons varied, but Carl knew the truth. The goblins were patient, wanting their mountains back. Sometimes at night, Carl wondered about the deeper mines, thousands of feet down. What else waited there? The coal industry had dug into ancient places, and now those places pushed back. The Hopkinsville goblins were the polite ones, giving warnings and escape routes. Carl feared what might rise from the deepest shafts when the last human left. In eastern Kentucky, mines stood empty but not abandoned. Silver eyes watched from darkness, planning for when the mountains would be theirs once more. Story 10. The Talipo Rebecca Nash had turned her grandmother's old Tennessee mountain cabin into a profitable rental property. City folks paid good money for authentic Appalachian experiences. No Wi-Fi, no cell service, just peace and quiet in a 100-year-old cabin. She handled the bookings, cleaned between guests, and thought she'd heard every possible complaint, until the Hartley family's stay. It was mid-November when she got the frantic call on the emergency satellite phone she left for guests. Mrs. Hartley was hysterical, barely coherent, saying something about finding a tail and needing to leave immediately. Rebecca made the 2-hour drive up the mountain, expecting to find city people spooked by a dead possum or raccoon. She found the Hartleys packed and waiting in their car, engine running. Mr. Hartley handed her an old mason jar with something floating in alcohol. A tail unlike anything Rebecca had seen. 6 inches long, covered in coarse black fur with a strange paddle-like end. It looked fresh, still bleeding where it had been severed. "Found it in the root cellar, Mr. Hartley said, his face pale. "Kids were exploring. Soon as they brought it up, things went wrong." Rebecca tried to calm them, suggested it was some unknown animal, but Mrs. Hartley cut her off. "It spoke to us, scratched words in the frost on the windows. 'Give it back,' over and over. 'Give it back.' They left the jar and drove away, refusing Rebecca's refund, refusing to ever return. She stood alone outside the cabin, holding the jar, feeling foolish but unsettled. The tail moved in the liquid, just the alcohol sloshing, she told herself. That night, Rebecca stayed at the cabin to clean and investigate. She'd grown up with mountain stories, knew the old tales her grandmother used to tell, but knowing stories and living them were different things entirely. The scratching started at midnight. Not random animal sounds, but deliberate, rhythmic, claws on wood, circling the cabin. Rebecca looked out the window and saw nothing but darkness. The motion sensor lights she'd installed for guests weren't triggering, as if whatever moved out there had no heat, no substance. Then came the voice. Not human, not animal, but something between, wet and raspy, like vocal cords that weren't meant for speech. It came from everywhere at once, seeping through the walls. "Tailipo, Tailipo, give me back my Tailipo." Rebecca's hands shook as she reached for the jar. The tail inside was moving now, not drifting, but swimming, trying to reach the side closest to the door. The scratching intensified, and through the window, she caught a glimpse of what wanted in. It should have been impossible, a creature the size of a large dog, but wrong in every proportion. The body was too long, too flexible, moving like a ferret, but covered in that same coarse black fur. The legs were too short for the body, ending in hands that were almost human, but tipped with claws. And where the tail should be, a raw weeping wound. But it was the face that made Rebecca step back from the window. Almost human, stretched over the wrong skull shape, with eyes that held too much intelligence and a mouth full of teeth that didn't match. Some flat like a person's, others sharp like a predator's. "Give me back my Tailipo," it said again, and this time she saw its mouth move, forming words it shouldn't be able to speak. Rebecca did what her grandmother would have done. She tried to bargain. "I'll put it outside," she called. "Take it and go." "No." The creature pressed against the window, its breath fogging the glass. "You took it from the cold dark. Bring it back to the cold dark. Down below where it was safe, where it was sleeping. The root cellar." Rebecca understood now. The Hartley children hadn't just found the tail. They'd disturbed something that had been deliberately hidden, maybe for decades. She grabbed the jar and a flashlight, heading for the cellar door in the kitchen floor. The stairs were older than the cabin itself, carved from mountain stone. The cellar was small, cramped, filled with empty shelves and decades of dust. In the far corner, she found what she was looking for, a space where the dust had been recently disturbed, where small hands had reached and grabbed. Behind her, on the stairs, claws clicked on stone. She didn't turn around. "Put it back," the voice said, so close she could smell its breath. Earth and old meat and something chemical like formaldehyde. "Put it back and forget." Rebecca placed the jar in the disturbed space, still not looking back. The tail inside was thrashing now, desperate. The moment the jar touched the ground, it shattered, not from impact but from within, the tail bursting free and writhing across the floor toward the stairs. She pressed against the wall as something large brushed past her. In the dim light, she saw the tail reattaching itself, flesh knitting together with wet organic sounds. The creature turned to face her, whole again, and for a moment they stood frozen in the ancient cellar. "Some things sleep in the deep places," it said, its voice clearer now, more human. "Some things should stay sleeping. Your grandmother knew. She fed me dreams and memories to keep me quiet. But the young ones woke me, took my tale, made me solid again. "I'll keep them away," Rebecca whispered. "No more rentals, I'll board it up." The creature tilted its head, considering. "Feed me like she did. Bring me stories, bring me dreams. Once a month when the moon is dark, or I'll come up there and I'll take more than stories." Rebecca nodded, understanding the bargain she was making. The creature flowed back into the darkness of the cellar's furthest corner, becoming shadow and whisper again. She climbed the stairs on shaking legs, closed the cellar door and added 3 new locks. She cancelled all future bookings, citing maintenance issues. Once a month she returns to the cabin alone, goes down to the cellar with a thermos of her grandmother's special tea and a notebook full of stories. She sits in the darkness and reads aloud while something in the corner listens and feeds on words. Because some things in the mountains are older than memory, and some bargains once made can never be broken. The Talipo sleeps again in the deep places, but it sleeps lightly, and it dreams of the world above. Rebecca is its keeper now, as her grandmother was before and as someone else will be after. The cabin stands empty most days, but never abandoned. And in the root cellar, something with too many teeth smiles in its sleep, its tail wrapped tight around its impossible body, waiting for the next dark moon and the stories that keep it fed. Rebecca Nash had turned her grandmother's Tennessee mountain cabin into a rental property. City folks paid well for authentic Appalachian experiences. No Wi-Fi, no cell service, just peace in a century-old cabin. She handled bookings and cleaning, thinking she'd heard every complaint. Until the Hartley family. Mid-November brought a frantic call on the emergency satellite phone. Mrs. Hartley was hysterical, saying something about finding a tail. Rebecca drove 2 hours up the mountain, expecting city people spooked by a dead animal. The Hartleys waited in their running car. Mr. Hartley handed her a mason jar with something floating in alcohol, a 6-inch tail covered in coarse black fur with a paddle-like end, still bleeding where severed. "Kids found it in the root cellar," he said. "Soon as they brought it up, things went wrong." Rebecca suggested it was some unknown animal, but Mrs. Hartley interrupted. It spoke, scratched words in the window frost. "Give it back," over and over. They left the jar and drove away. Rebecca stood alone, holding it, watching the tail move in the liquid. Just sloshing alcohol, she told herself. That night, she stayed to investigate. Midnight brought deliberate scratching, claws on wood circling the cabin. The motion sensors weren't triggering, as if whatever moved had no heat, no substance. Then the voice came, wet and raspy, seeping through walls. "Talipo, Talipo, give me back my Talipo." The tail in the jar moved purposefully now, swimming toward the door. Through the window, Rebecca glimpsed the impossible, a creature like an oversized ferret, but wrong in every proportion. Too long, too flexible, with short legs ending in almost human hands tipped with claws. Where the tail should be, a weeping wound. The face was worst. Human features stretched over the wrong skull, intelligent eyes and mismatched teeth. It pressed against the glass. "Give me back my Talipo." Rebecca tried bargaining. "I'll put it outside." "No, you took it from the cold dark. Return it to the cold dark. Down below, where it was sleeping." The root cellar. The Hartley children had disturbed something deliberately hidden. Rebecca grabbed the jar and headed for the cellar door. Ancient stone stairs led down. In the far corner, she found disturbed dust where small hands had reached. Behind her, claws clicked on stone. "Put it back and forget," the voice said, breath smelling of earth and old meat. Rebecca placed the jar down. It shattered from within, the tail writhing free toward the stairs. She pressed against the wall as something large brushed past. The tail reattached with wet, organic sounds. The creature faced her, whole again. "Some things sleep in the deep places. Your grandmother knew. She fed me dreams to keep me quiet, but the young ones woke me, made me solid again." "I'll keep them away," Rebecca whispered. "No more rentals. Feed me like she did. Stories and dreams, monthly when the moon is dark, or I'll come up there for more than stories." Rebecca understood the bargain. The creature flowed back into darkness. She climbed upstairs and added 3 locks to the cellar door. She cancelled all bookings. Once a month, she returns alone with her grandmother's tea and a notebook of stories. She reads aloud in darkness while something listens and feeds on words. because some mountain things are older than memory, and some bargains can't be broken. The Talipo sleeps again, but lightly, dreaming of above. Rebecca is its keeper now, as her grandmother was before. The cabin stands empty but never abandoned. In the root cellar, something with too many teeth smiles in sleep, tail wrapped tight around its impossible body, waiting for the next dark moon and the stories that keep it fed. Story 11. The White Things. Danny Wilson was 19 and thought he was invincible. Urban exploration was his drug of choice: abandoned hospitals, dead malls, forgotten factories. When he heard about the Coalwood mine in West Virginia, sealed since 1967 after a collapse killed 13 miners, he knew he had to get inside. His best friend Jake tried to talk him out of it, but ended up coming along. They both should have listened to the warnings. The locals in town went quiet when Danny asked about the mine. An old-timer at the gas station finally spoke up. That mine ain't just sealed because of the cave-in. Things came up from the deep shafts after. White things. Crawling things, stay away, boy. Danny laughed it off as mountain superstition. At midnight, he and Jake cut through the rusted fence and pried open the sealed entrance. Their headlamps pierced the darkness, revealing tunnels that stretched beyond the light's reach. The air tasted of rust and something else, something organic and wrong. They'd explored for an hour, marking their path with spray paint, when Jake noticed the sounds. Not the normal creaks and drips of an old mine, but something rhythmic. Like breathing, but from too many lungs, echoing from the deeper shafts they hadn't reached yet. "We should go," Jake said, his voice tight. Danny was already moving deeper, drawn by the mystery. The tunnel sloped down sharply, and the temperature dropped 20 degrees in as many feet. Their breath came out in clouds, and frost formed on the walls despite it being September outside. That's when they found the bones. Not old bones from the cave-in. These were arranged in patterns, spirals and circles that hurt to look at directly. Some were human. Others were too large, too strangely shaped. All were gnawed by teeth that left marks too wide for any animal Danny knew. Jake grabbed his arm. "We're leaving. Now." But the way back had changed. The tunnel they'd come through was gone, replaced by solid rock. Their spray paint markers were there, pointing at walls that shouldn't exist. Danny's phone showed they'd been underground for 6 hours, though his watch said 1. The breathing sounds grew louder, closer. And then they saw them. The white things crawled on all fours, but their proportions were human. Pale to the point of translucence, their skin showed dark veins and darker organs beneath. No hair, no clothes, just flesh that had never known sunlight. Their fingers and toes had grown long and splayed for gripping rock. But it was their faces that made Jake scream. Human features stretched and distorted, eyes clouded white, mouths hanging open to reveal rows of filed, sharp teeth. Dozens of them, flowing up from the deeper tunnels like a pale tide. Danny ran. Jake was right behind him, their headlamps swinging wildly, creating a strobe effect that made the white things appear to teleport. The creatures didn't run. They scuttled along walls and ceilings with horrible grace surrounding them, herding them deeper into the mine. A side tunnel appeared, and Danny dove in, pulling Jake after him. They scrambled through passages barely wide enough for their bodies, hearing the white things flowing behind them like water. The tunnel opened into a vast chamber, and Danny's light revealed the truth of Coalwood Mine. Bodies, hundreds of them, in various stages of transformation. Some still wore the remnants of mining gear from 1967. Others were more recent, hikers, explorers, people who'd gone missing over the decades. All were changing, skin bleaching, limbs stretching, becoming new white things. In the center sat something that might have been the first, massive, ancient, more spider than human. It spoke without moving its mouth, the words appearing in Danny's head like infected thoughts. The deep called us, changed us, fed us. Now you join, now you feed others. Jake made a sound, half sob, half laugh. Danny turned to see his friend's skin already paling, veins darkening beneath. Jake's eyes were clouding over, and when he smiled, his teeth looked sharper. "Run," Jake whispered, his voice already changing. "I'll try to hold them." Danny ran, not back the way they came, but forward, following some instinct he didn't understand. The white things let him pass, focused on Jake, who was screaming now, the sound becoming less human with each second. The tunnel he chose sloped up sharply. His legs burned, lungs screaming for air, but he climbed. Behind him, the breathing sound became a roar, hundreds of white things flowing up from the deep, no longer content to wait for prey to come to them. Danny's headlamp died. In the absolute darkness, he climbed by feel, fingers bloody from gripping stone. Just when his strength failed, his hand touched wood, old support beams. He was in a different section, maybe an older entrance. He pushed, threw his weight against rotting boards, and burst through into moonlight. He was 3 miles from where they'd entered, on the opposite side of the mountain. Behind him, pale shapes tested the night air, recoiling from even the weak moon. But they were learning, adapting. Some made it a few feet before retreating. Danny ran to his car and drove straight through the night, not stopping until he reached Ohio. He never reported Jake missing. What could he say that anyone would believe? But he followed the news. More disappearances around Colwood, stories of pale figures seen at night, testing the boundaries of their underground world. The mine's sealed entrances were reinforced with concrete and steel. Officials cited structural dangers. But Danny knew the truth. They were trying to keep something in, not keep people out. And it wasn't working. The white things were patient. They had all the time in the darkness, and they were so very hungry. Sometimes Danny wakes to find his skin paler than before, his teeth feeling sharper. He knows Jake is down there, fully changed now, crawling through infinite tunnels with his new family. And he knows that one day the call of the deep will be too strong to resist. The white things are waiting. They remember his scent, his fear, his brief time in their domain. And in the abandoned Colwood mine, they're learning how to survive in smaller doses of light, preparing for the night when they can finally crawl up into a world full of soft, warm prey. Danny moved to Arizona, as far from mountains and mines as he could get. But even in the desert he can hear them sometimes, that rhythmic breathing from deep places, calling him home to the darkness where white things wait with patient, hungry smiles. Danny Wilson was 19 and thought urban exploration made him invincible. When he heard about Colwood Mine in West Virginia, sealed since 1967 after 13 deaths, he had to get inside. Jake, his best friend, came along despite his doubts. The locals went quiet when Danny asked about the mine. An old-timer finally warned, "That mine ain't sealed just for the cave-in. Things came up from the deep after. White things. Stay away, boy." At midnight, they cut through the fence and pried open the entrance. Their headlamps revealed tunnels stretching beyond sight. The air tasted of rust and something organic, wrong. An hour in, Jake noticed sounds, rhythmic breathing from too many lungs, echoing from deeper shafts. The tunnel sloped down sharply, temperature dropping 20 degrees. Frost formed on walls, despite September weather outside. They found bones arranged in patterns that hurt to look at. Some human, others too large, too strange, all gnawed by teeth that left impossibly wide marks. "We're leaving," Jake insisted, but their return tunnel was gone, replaced by solid rock. Their spray paint markers pointed at walls that shouldn't exist. Danny's phone showed 6 hours underground, his watch showed 1. The breathing grew louder. Then they saw them. White things crawled on all fours with human proportions. Translucent skin showed dark veins and organs. Hairless, naked, with splayed fingers and toes for gripping rock. Human faces stretched and distorted, eyes clouded white, mouths full of filed sharp teeth. Dozens flowed up from deeper tunnels. They ran, headlamps creating strobe effects that made the creatures appear to teleport. The white things scuttled along walls and ceilings, herding them deeper. A side tunnel appeared. They dove in, scrambling through passages barely wide enough for bodies, hearing the things flowing behind like water. The tunnel opened into a vast chamber. Danny's light revealed hundreds of bodies in various stages of transformation. Some wore mining gear from 1967. Others were recent, hikers, explorers, all changing, skin bleaching, limbs stretching, becoming new white things. In the center sat something ancient, more spider than human. Words appeared in Danny's head. "The deep called us, changed us, now you join." Jake made a half-sob, half-laugh sound. Danny turned to see his friend's skin paling, veins darkening. Jake's eyes clouded over. "Run," Jake whispered, voice already changing. "I'll try to hold them." Danny ran forward, following instinct. The white things let him pass, focused on Jake's increasingly inhuman screams. The chosen tunnel sloped up sharply. His headlamp died. In absolute darkness, he climbed by feel, fingers bloody, until his hand touched wood, old support beams. He burst through rotting boards into moonlight, 3 miles from their entry point. Behind him, pale shapes tested the night air, recoiling from even weak moonlight, but some made it a few feet before retreating. They were learning. Danny drove straight to Ohio without stopping. He never reported Jake missing, but he followed the news. More disappearances around Coalwood, pale figures seen at night. The mine entrances were reinforced with concrete. Officials cited structural dangers, but Danny knew they were trying to keep something in. It wasn't working. The white things were patient, learning to survive in smaller doses of light. Sometimes Danny wakes to find his skin paler, teeth feeling sharper. He knows Jake is down there, fully changed, crawling through infinite tunnels. He knows the call of the deep will eventually be too strong. Danny moved to Arizona, far from mountains and mines. But even in the desert he hears them, rhythmic breathing from deep places, calling him home to darkness where white things wait with patient, hungry smiles. Story 12. The Tennessee Wildman officer Janet Brooks had been with the Tennessee State Police for 5 years, but nothing in her training prepared her for the call that came in on a humid August night. 3 hikers missing in Cherokee National Forest, last seen near the old growth section rangers called the Devil's Backbone. It was her sector, her responsibility, and she knew those trails better than most. She should have known something was hunting them. The first signs were subtle. Trees marked with scratches too high for bears, too deliberate for animals. Janet found the hikers' abandoned campsite at dawn, tents shredded from the inside out, blood on the fabric but no bodies. Their food was untouched, but their clothing was scattered across a 100-yard radius, torn to ribbons. She called for backup and K9 units, but the dogs refused to track. They whined and pulled back toward the vehicles, tails between their legs. The handler, a 20-year veteran, had never seen them react like that. "Something's wrong here," he said. "These dogs will track through hell itself, but they won't go near those trails." Janet pushed on alone, following drag marks that led deeper into the forest. The marks were strange, not the smooth grooves of something being pulled, but a pattern that suggested the victims had been carried by something walking upright, something with a stride length of nearly 8 feet. 2 miles in, she found the first body part. A hand cleanly severed at the wrist, arranged on a flat rock like an offering. No tool marks. It had been twisted off with tremendous force. She photographed it, marked the GPS coordinates, and tried not to think about the strength required to dismember a human body bare-handed. The forest grew denser as she followed the trail. Ancient trees blocked out most sunlight, creating a perpetual twilight. No birds sang, no insects buzzed, just her breathing and the crunch of leaves that seemed too loud in the unnatural quiet. She found the first makeshift shelter a mile later, branches woven together with a skill that spoke of intelligence, not instinct. Inside were bones, human and animal mixed together, gnawed clean. Some were old, years maybe. Others still had tissue attached. On the shelter walls, mud paintings depicted hunting scenes, stick figures fleeing from a massive humanoid shape. Janet's radio crackled. "Brooks, where's your 20? GPS shows you're way off trail." She tried to respond, but static filled the channel. Her GPS unit spun wildly before dying completely. Even her compass needle wavered, unable to find north. She was alone in a part of the forest that didn't want to be found. Movement in her peripheral vision made her spin, hand on her service weapon. Nothing there, but the feeling of being watched pressed against her like a physical weight. Then she smelled it, a mix of wet dog, rotting meat, and something musky, almost human, but wrong. The attack came from above. It dropped from the canopy, landing with impossible silence for something so large. Janet had a split second to take in details. 8 feet tall, covered in matted brown fur, muscles rippling beneath. The face was almost human, but the jaw protruded too far, filled with teeth meant for tearing. The eyes held intelligence, cunning, and a rage that seemed ancient. She drew her weapon, but it moved faster than anything that size should. One massive hand slapped the gun away, while the other grabbed her vest, lifting her off the ground like she weighed nothing. This close, she could see scars covering its body. Bullet wounds, knife marks, evidence of 100 encounters it had survived. "You hunt us," it said, and Janet's mind reeled. The voice was guttural, barely human, but the words were clear. "We hunt you back." It carried her deeper into the forest, her struggles useless against its strength. They passed more shelters, more bone piles. She saw other shapes moving in the shadows. A family group, she realized. Not just one wild man, but a breeding population hidden in the deepest parts of the forest. The creature brought her to what could only be described as a village, crude but functional shelters arranged around a central clearing. Other wildmen emerged, different sizes, different ages. Children that looked almost human, except for their pronounced brows and thick body hair. Females nursing infants. An entire society hidden from the modern world. An elderly wildman approached, moving with surprising grace despite his obvious age. Scars covered his body, including what looked like an old radio collar around his neck. When he spoke, his words were clearer, more practiced. "You're the law woman who patrols our borders," he said. "We've watched you. You respect the forest. That's why you live. The hikers came too deep, saw too much, would have brought others." He gestured to the village. "We've hidden here since your kind drove us from the valleys. Each year you come closer. Each year we have less space." Janet understood then. These weren't monsters or missing links. They were survivors, a parallel branch of humanity that had chosen the deep forest over civilization. But that choice came with a price, the need to eliminate any threat to their secrecy. "Let me go," she said. "I'll report them as animal attacks. No one will know." The elder studied her with eyes too human for comfort. "You'll dream of us. You'll know we're here. Can you live with that? Can you patrol these woods knowing we watch? Knowing what happens to those who come too deep?" Janet nodded, though her mouth was dry as dust. "I can redirect patrols, keep people away from this area." "And if you fail? If others come?" She knew the answer, had seen it in the bone piles. "Then you do what you have to." They blindfolded her for the journey out, but she memorized the feeling of movement, the time it took. When they removed the cloth, she was back at her patrol car, the sun setting behind the mountains. Her gun was on the hood, along with personal effects from the 3 hikers. Wallets, phones, a wedding ring. "Animal attack," the elder said one last time. "Bears, very tragic." They melted back into the forest before she could respond. Janet stood there for a long moment, then called in the report. "Bears," she said. "Aggressive bears in the Devil's Backbone area. Recommend closing that section of trail indefinitely." She filed paperwork, attended the memorial services, accepted the official version of events. But now, patrolling those forest roads, she sees movement in the trees. Knows they're watching. Sometimes finds offerings at her usual stops. Carved wooden figures, bundles of medicinal herbs, silent acknowledgements of their bargain. The Tennessee wild man is real. Not a single creature, but a hidden people, surviving in the margins, protecting their secret with lethal efficiency. And Officer Janet Brooks drives her routes knowing she's the thin line between 2 worlds, one that builds roads and cities, and one that runs silent through ancient forests, hunting any who venture too far from the light. Officer Janet Brooks had 5 years with Tennessee State Police when the call came in. 3 hikers missing in Cherokee National Forest near Devil's Backbone. Her sector, her responsibility. She should have known something was hunting them. Dawn revealed their campsite, tents shredded from inside out, blood on fabric but no bodies. Food untouched, clothing scattered across 100 yards. Trees bore scratches too high for bears, too deliberate for animals. The K9 units refused to track, whining and pulling back. "Never seen them act like this," the handler said. "They won't go near those trails." Janet continued alone, following drag marks deeper into forest. Strange marks, not smooth grooves but patterns suggesting victims were carried by something walking upright with 8-foot strides. 2 miles in, she found a hand on a flat rock, severed cleanly at the wrist. No tool marks, twisted off with tremendous force. She photographed it, marked coordinates, tried not to think about the strength required. The forest grew denser, ancient trees creating perpetual twilight. No birds, no insects, just unnatural quiet. She found a makeshift shelter, branches woven with intelligent skill. Inside, human and animal bones gnawed clean. Mud paintings on the walls showed stick figures fleeing from a massive humanoid shape. Her radio crackled with static. GPS spun wildly before dying. Even her compass failed. She was alone in a place that didn't want to be found. Movement in peripheral vision. The smell hit. Wet dog, rotting meat, something musky and almost human. The attack came from above. It dropped from the canopy, 8 feet tall, covered in matted fur, muscles rippling beneath. The face almost human but wrong, protruding jaw filled with tearing teeth. Eyes holding intelligence, cunning, ancient rage. She drew her weapon, but it moved impossibly fast. One hand slapped the gun away while the other lifted her by the vest. Scars covered its body, bullets, knives, evidence of survived encounters. "You hunt us," it growled, voice barely human but clear. "We hunt you back." It carried her deeper, past more shelters and bone piles. Other shapes moved in shadows, a family group, a breeding population hidden in the deepest forest. They reached a village, functional shelters around a clearing. Wild men of different sizes emerged, children almost human except for pronounced brows and thick hair, females nursing infants, an entire society. An elderly wildman approached, scars covering his body, including an old radio collar. His words were clearer. "You're the law woman who patrols our borders. We've watched you, you respect the forest, that's why you live. The hikers came too deep, would have brought others. We've hidden since your kind drove us from the valleys. Each year, less space. These weren't monsters but survivors, a parallel humanity choosing forest over civilization. That choice meant eliminating threats to their secrecy." "Let me go," Janet said. "I'll report animal attacks." The elder studied her. "You'll know we're here. Can you patrol knowing we watch? Knowing what happens to those who come too deep? I can redirect patrols, keep people away. And if others come..." She knew the answer from the bone piles. "You do what you have to." They blindfolded her for the return journey. When removed, she stood by her patrol car at sunset. Her gun lay on the hood with the hiker's effects: wallets, phones, a wedding ring. "Animal attack," the elder said. "Bears, very tragic." They vanished into the forest. Janet called it in. "Aggressive bears in Devil's Backbone, recommend closing that section indefinitely." She filed paperwork, attended memorials, accepted the official version. But now, patrolling those roads, she sees movement in trees, knows they're watching. Sometimes finds offerings at her stops, carved figures, medicinal herbs, silent acknowledgements of their bargain. The Tennessee wildman is real. Not one creature but a hidden people surviving in margins, protecting their secret with lethal efficiency. And Officer Janet Brooks drives her routes as the thin line between two worlds, one building roads and cities, one running silent through ancient forests, hunting any who venture too far from the light. Story 13. The Devil Monkeys. Roy Lancaster had been a telephone lineman for 22 years, climbing poles and maintaining lines through the remote mountain service roads of Virginia. He'd worked through storms, dealt with bears knocking down poles, even had his truck charged by a territorial buck once. But nothing compared to the summer the Devil Monkeys discovered they could use the phone lines as highways. It started with routine maintenance calls, lines down, static interference, equipment damaged in ways that didn't match storm patterns. Roy found claw marks on poles 30 feet up, insulation stripped from wires with surgical precision, and transformer boxes opened from the inside. His supervisor blamed squirrels and sent him out with extra repair supplies. The first time Roy saw one, he was 40 feet up a pole near Beartown Mountain, replacing a damaged relay. Movement caught his eye, something traveling along the wire with impossible speed and balance. It stopped on the next pole over, and Roy got his first clear look at a devil monkey. 3 feet tall, covered in dark gray fur, with a build like a baboon, but wrong in every detail. The face was too intelligent, almost human in its expressions. The tail was prehensile and strong, wrapping around the wire for stability. But it was the hands that made Roy's blood run cold. 5 fingers with opposable thumbs, holding what looked like a piece of his equipment. They stared at each other for a long moment. Then the creature bared its teeth, far too many teeth for any primate mouth, and let out a shriek that made Roy's ears ring. More shrieks answered from the forest, and suddenly the wires were alive with movement. Dozens of them, flowing along the lines like acrobats converging on his position. Roy descended fast, burning his hands on the safety rope. He made it to his truck as the first devil monkey reached his pole. It didn't follow to the ground. Instead, it began systematically destroying the equipment Roy had just installed, using tools stolen from his belt when he wasn't looking. He called dispatch, trying to explain, but what could he say? Monkeys that didn't exist were sabotaging the phone lines. He reported aggressive wildlife and drove to the next repair site, hoping it was an isolated encounter. It wasn't. Every pole he climbed, they were waiting. Sometimes visible, sometimes just shadows in the canopy. They'd learned his route, his schedule. Worse, they were learning from him. Roy would repair a junction box, only to watch them take it apart again, mimicking his movements with disturbing accuracy. The attacks escalated. They began dropping things on him, rocks, branches, stolen tools. One afternoon near Whitetop Mountain, they'd strung wire between poles at neck height, nearly decapitating him when he drove between them. The wire was twisted and knotted in ways that required not just intelligence, but malicious creativity. Roy started wearing a helmet, carried bear spray, varied his routes. Nothing helped. They were always one step ahead, always watching from the wires above. His supervisor thought he was having a breakdown until Roy brought him along one day. They were replacing a transformer when the devil monkeys struck in force. 30 of them, maybe more, descending on the truck like a gray wave. They went for the equipment first, throwing tools into the forest, shredding spare wire, pouring hydraulic fluid onto the ground. When Roy and his supervisor tried to stop them, the creatures turned aggressive. Devil monkeys aren't large, but they're strong and they work together. They swarmed the supervisor, not trying to kill but to humiliate, stealing his glasses, his wallet, his keys, passing them hand to hand in a mocking game of keep away. Roy tried to help, but found himself pinned against the truck by 3 of them, their hands frighteningly human as they held him in place. The largest devil monkey, scarred and missing an eye, approached Roy with deliberate steps. It spoke, not words, but a series of clicks and whistles that somehow conveyed meaning directly to Roy's brain. The message was clear. These lines, these poles, this territory was theirs. Humans were intruders. It pressed something into Roy's hand, a phone company ID badge from the 1960s, weathered and worn. How many linemen had they driven off over the decades? How long had they been defending their wire highways from human interference? The creatures released them as suddenly as they'd attacked, melting back into the forest. Roy and his supervisor sat in the truck, shaking, trying to process what had happened. The supervisor tried to call the main office, but the radio was dead. The devil monkeys had removed crucial components while they were distracted. They drove back in silence. The supervisor filed for early retirement the next week. Roy stayed on, but requested transfer to underground cable maintenance. No more poles, no more wires, no more encounters with things that shouldn't exist. The mountain phone lines still need maintenance, but the company has trouble keeping linemen in those areas. Equipment goes missing. Trucks break down in ways that suggest sabotage, and sometimes workers report seeing shadows on the wires, moving too fast to be birds, too smart to be animals. Roy's replacement lasted 3 days before refusing to climb another pole. He claimed the monkeys had learned to mimic human voices, calling his name from the wires, laughing when he looked up. The company switched to contract workers, but even they won't service certain areas anymore. In the remote mountains of Virginia, the phone lines carry more than voices. They're highways for creatures that have claimed the high wires as their domain. The devil monkeys travel their aerial routes undisturbed now, chattering in their clicking language, defending their territory with an intelligence that suggests they're not just animals, but something far more dangerous. Their competition. Roy still has the ID badge the one-eyed monkey gave him. Sometimes he wonders about its original owner, whether they retired peacefully or became another casualty in a war most people don't know exists. a war between humans trying to connect the world with wires and the devil monkeys who claimed those wires first. Story 14. The Bat Squatch Maria Gonzalez had been with Mountain Search and Rescue for 7 years, but the call about missing hikers near the old Mount St. Helens lava tubes always made her uneasy. The Appalachian extension of the volcanic geology created cave systems that defied mapping, and people who went missing there rarely came back. This time, it was a group of 3 experienced cavers who'd failed to return from a week-long expedition. Maria's team of 4 assembled at dawn, herself, Jake the medical specialist, Connor the cave expert, and Rachel handling communications. The missing caver's last known position was near Devil's Throat, a massive cave entrance that local tribes had marked with warnings for generations. Even now, 60 years after the area was open to recreation, experienced guides avoided it. The entrance lived up to its name, a jagged mouth in the mountainside that seemed to swallow light. Their powerful LED arrays barely penetrated 50 feet into the darkness. The missing team's rope anchors were still in place, equipment bags abandoned just inside the cave mouth. Whatever happened, they hadn't made it far. Blood, Jake said, kneeling by dark stains on the rocks. Not much, but fresh. Maybe 2 days old. Connor examined the ropes. Cut clean through. Not frayed from rubbing. This was deliberate. He held up an end, showing the precise slice. But what could cut climbing rope like this? They descended carefully, following the blood trail. The cave opened into a massive chamber, easily 200 feet high. Their lights played across formations that shouldn't exist in this geology. Scratch marks in the ceiling, too regular to be natural, too high to be made from the ground. Rachel tried her radio. "Base, this is Team 3. We're in the main chamber and..." Static exploded from the speaker, so loud they all winced. In the echo, Maria swore she heard something else. Wings. Massive wings. A shadow passed through their light beams. Too big, too fast. Connor swung his light up, tracking movement across the cave ceiling. What the hell was that? Before anyone could answer, something struck him from above. Connor vanished into the darkness with a scream that cut off too quickly. His light tumbled down, spinning wildly before shattering on the rocks below. "Formation! Backs together!" Maria ordered. They formed a triangle, lights pointing outward. The cave was silent, except for their ragged breathing. Then, from somewhere high above, came a sound that made Maria's skin crawl. A chittering screech that was part bat, part primate, all predator. "Connor!" Jake called out. "Connor, respond!" A wet thud answered. Connor's helmet landed in their light beams, the headlamp still functioning. Deep gouges marked the plastic and the inside was slick with blood. "We're leaving. Now," Maria decided. But as they moved toward the entrance, shapes detached from the ceiling. Not one creature, but 3, dropping with controlled falls that spoke of absolute mastery of the vertical environment. In the stark LED light, Maria saw the impossible made real. 8 feet tall, bodies covered in dark fur that seemed to absorb light. The wings were the worst part, membranous like a bat's but attached to arms that ended in hands. Actual hands with opposable thumbs, currently gripping the shredded remains of climbing gear. The faces were a nightmare fusion of bat and gorilla, eyes reflecting their lights in flat red discs. One landed between them and the exit. It moved with disturbing grace for something so large, wings folding against its back like a cape. When it vocalized, the sound penetrated Maria's skull, making her teeth ache. Echolocation, she realized. It was mapping them with sound. "The flares," she said quietly. "Jake," on 3. They carried emergency flares for signaling, but the bright light might disorient creatures adapted to darkness. Jake understood immediately, hand moving to his belt. 1, 2, 3! The cave exploded with red light. The creatures shrieked, wings snapping open as they launched themselves away from the burning flares. Maria's team ran for the entrance, but the largest bat squatch recovered faster than expected. It swooped down, claws raking Rachel's pack, lifting her off the ground. Maria grabbed Rachel's legs, holding on as the creature's wings beat powerful downdrafts. Jake threw another flare directly at the creature. It released Rachel, who fell hard onto the rocks. Maria helped her up, half carrying her toward the fading daylight of the entrance. Behind them, the Bat-Squatch calls grew louder, angrier. More shapes moved in the darkness. How many of these things lived in the cave system? They burst from Devil's throat into blessed sunlight, not stopping until they were 100 yards from the entrance. "Where's Connor?" Bass asked over the radio. Maria looked back at the cave mouth where shadows moved just inside the darkness. Red eyes watched them, waiting. "Gone," she said. "And we found the missing cavers, or what's left of them." The official report blamed unstable cave conditions. The area was closed indefinitely, the entrance sealed with concrete barriers. But Maria knew concrete wouldn't hold those things if they wanted out. They were smart, tool-using, pack hunters that owned the darkness below. She transferred to coastal rescue operations, never to work mountains again. But sometimes she reads about missing spelunkers in cave systems across the Appalachians and wonders if there's a whole population down there. Bat-Squatch colonies connected by unmapped passages, emerging to hunt, dragging prey back to depths where sunlight never reaches. Jake quit rescue work entirely. Rachel still wakes screaming, feeling phantom claws lifting her into darkness. And Connor's body was never recovered. Maria tries not to think about what the Bat-Squatch do with their prey, whether death comes quickly or whether there are worse fates in the deep caves. The concrete barriers at Devil's Throat show claw marks now, getting deeper each year. Local rangers report strange sounds at night, wing beats too large for any bird, echolocation clicks that make electronic equipment malfunction. Maria knows they're testing the barriers, learning about concrete, about humans, about the world above their caves. And she knows that someday, when they're ready, the Bat-Squatch will emerge from Devil's Throat and every other deep cave to reclaim the night sky they abandoned for the darkness below. Story 15. The Sheep Squatch. Frank Morrison had raised sheep in Greenbrier County, West Virginia, for 38 years. His father had raised sheep, his grandfather too. The Morrisons knew every predator that stalked these hills: coyotes, black bears, the occasional mountain lion passing through. But in the autumn of his 58th year, something new came down from the high country, and it didn't kill like any predator Frank knew. It started subtly. 3 ewes missing from the north pasture, no trace except some trampled grass, and a lingering smell like wet wool mixed with sulfur. Frank blamed coyotes and reinforced the fencing. A week later, he found the missing sheep, or what was left of them. They'd been skinned with surgical precision, the pelts removed in one piece, the carcasses arranged in a perfect triangle in the middle of his hayfield. No coyote did that. No bear either. Frank installed motion sensor lights and cameras, the expensive kind hunters used. For 2 weeks, nothing. Then an entire section of reinforced fence was torn apart like tissue paper. Not cut, not broken, torn. The metal mesh peeled back by something with tremendous strength. 8 sheep gone in one night. This time he found tufts of white fur caught on the destroyed fence, but it wasn't from his sheep. It was coarser, longer, and when he held it to the light, it seemed to shimmer with its own pale glow. He called the sheriff, who sent a deputy to take a report. The deputy suggested a black bear, maybe rabid, and promised increased patrols. Frank didn't bother explaining that no bear left fence metal twisted into perfect spirals or arranged carcasses in geometric patterns. He'd handle this himself. Frank had fought in Vietnam, knew about ambush tactics and killing fields. He set up in his barn's hayloft with clear sightlines to the sheep pen, his father's .30-06 loaded with rounds that could drop a grizzly. He waited 3 nights before it came. The motion lights failed to trigger. The cameras recorded only static, but Frank saw it clearly in the moonlight as it approached his flock. The thing stood 9 feet tall on legs like tree trunks. Its body was covered in thick white wool, but this was no sheep. The head was massive, with ram's horns that curved back from a face that mixed ovine and human features in ways that hurt to process. The arms were too long, ending in hands that sported both hooves and fingers. It moved among the sheep and they didn't flee. Instead, they gathered around it like it was one of them, bleating softly. The creature responded with sounds that were almost words, almost bleats. Something between that made Frank's teeth ache. It was choosing, he realized, selecting specific sheep with careful attention. Frank sighted down the rifle, finger on the trigger. The creature turned and looked directly at him through the barn wall, as if wood and distance meant nothing. Its eyes were horizontal pupils, like a sheep's, but lit with unmistakable intelligence. It raised one impossible hand in what might have been a greeting or a warning. Then it spoke, and Frank nearly dropped the rifle. The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, bypassing his ears to resonate in his chest. "Morrison, third of your line, your grandfather knew the compact." "What compact?" Frank whispered, though he was sure the thing could hear him. The sheep squatch, for what else could it be, moved closer to the barn. This near, Frank could see details that defied logic. The wool wasn't just white but luminescent, casting its own faint light. Symbols were carved into the horns, symbols that seemed to shift and change as he watched. "The high pastures," it said in that omnipresent voice. "Your grandfather grazed there in the drought of 32, found our sacred grounds. We could have taken everything. Instead, we made a deal, a tithe, the strongest of your flock for the protection of the rest." Frank's mind raced. His grandfather had always insisted on leaving the best ram and 3 prime ewes in the high pasture each winter, claimed it was tradition, good luck. The family had continued even after the old man died, never questioning why those sheep never returned come spring. "We stopped," Frank said, understanding flooding through him, "when the government bought those pastures for the national forest. We haven't left the tithe in 20 years. The creature's expression was unreadable on that inhuman face. "And so the compact breaks. We take what we're owed, 20 years of tithes, interest compounding." It turned back to the flock, reaching down with those horrible hand hooves. Frank knew he should shoot, but something in the creature's manner stopped him. It wasn't cruel or vicious. It was collecting a debt. "Wait," Frank called out. "What if we resume the tithe? I can get access to those pastures. I know people." The sheep squatch paused, tilting its massive head. "The world changes, Morrison. Fewer sheep on the mountains, fewer of us to need them. But," it seemed to consider, "4 of your best, each winter solstice, left at the stone circle your grandfather knew. Do this and your flocks prosper. Fail and we take everything. How do I know you'll keep your word?" The creature drew itself to its full height, and power radiated from it like heat from a forge. "We are older than your words for promises, older than your fences and your papers that say you own land. We keep compacts because that is what we are. Your grandfather knew this." It selected 4 sheep with careful precision, the best breeding stock, Frank noted with professional dismay. The animals followed it willingly as it walked toward the torn fence. At the gap, it turned back. "Winter solstice, Morrison, the stone circle. Your grandfather's blood knows the way." Then it was gone, vanishing into the forest with the sheep trotting behind like dogs. Frank climbed down from the loft on shaking legs and went to his grandfather's old desk. In a locked drawer he'd never opened, he found what he was looking for, a hand-drawn map showing trails that appeared on no modern chart, leading to a circle of standing stones high in the mountains. He made the first payment that December, driving 4 prize sheep up logging roads and forgotten paths, following his grandfather's map. The stone circle was real, ancient, predating any human settlement. Frank left the sheep and retreated, not waiting to see what collected them. His flock prospered after that, lower mortality rates than any farm in the county, twins and triplets born healthy, wool that fetched premium prices. The other farmers called him lucky, blessed. Frank knew better. He was paying protection to something older than agriculture itself. He trained his son to continue the tradition, showing him the map, explaining the compact. Some debts, he learned, passed down through generations, and in the high mountains of West Virginia, the sheep squatch guards its ancient grounds, growing fat on the tithe of the finest sheep, maintaining a bargain struck in desperation and sealed in mutual need. The torn fence still stands on Frank's property, the metal spirals serving as a reminder. Some years, on winter nights, he sees white shapes moving on the distant ridges, not sheep, but the things that shepherd them in ways humans were never meant to understand. Frank Morrison had raised sheep in Greenbrier County, West Virginia, for 38 years, following his father and grandfather. The Morrisons knew every predator in these hills. But in autumn, something new came from the high country that didn't kill like any predator Frank knew. 3 ewes vanished from the north pasture, leaving only trampled grass and a smell like wet wool mixed with sulfur. Frank blamed coyotes and reinforced the fence. A week later, he found them, skinned with surgical precision, pelts removed in one piece, carcasses arranged in a perfect triangle in his hayfield. No coyote did that. Frank installed cameras and motion lights. For 2 weeks, nothing. Then an entire fence section was torn apart like tissue paper. Not cut, but torn, metal mesh peeled back by tremendous strength. 8 sheep gone. He found white fur on the destroyed fence, coarser than sheep wool, shimmering with its own pale glow. 3 nights later, Frank waited in his barn's hayloft with his father's 3006. The motion lights didn't trigger. Cameras recorded only static, but in moonlight, he saw it clearly. 9 feet tall on legs like tree trunks, body covered in thick white wool. But this was no sheep. Massive head with ram's horns curving back from a face mixing ovine and human features, arms too long, ending in hands that sported both hooves and fingers. It moved among the sheep, who gathered around it instead of fleeing. The creature made sounds between words and bleats that made Frank's teeth ache. It was selecting specific sheep with careful attention. Frank sighted down the rifle. The creature turned and looked directly at him through the barn wall. Its sheep-like eyes held unmistakable intelligence. It raised one impossible hand in greeting or warning. Then it spoke, the voice resonating in Frank's chest. "Morrison, 3rd of your line. Your grandfather knew the compact." "What compact?" Frank whispered. The sheep squatch moved closer. Its wool wasn't just white, but luminescent. Symbols carved into the horns shifted as he watched. "The high pastures. Your grandfather grazed there in the drought of 32, found our sacred grounds. We made a deal, a tithe, the strongest of your flock for our protection." Frank's mind raced. His grandfather had always left the best ram and 3 prime ewes in the high pasture each winter, calling it tradition. The family continued even after he died, never questioning why those sheep never returned. "We stopped," Frank realized, "when the government bought those pastures. We haven't left the tithe in 20 years. And so the compact breaks, we take what we're owed, 20 years of tithes with interest." "Wait," Frank called. "What if we resume? I can get access to those pastures." The sheep squatch paused. 4 of your best each winter solstice, left at the stone circle your grandfather knew. Do this and your flocks prosper. Fail and we take everything. How do I know you'll keep your word?" The creature drew to its full height, power radiating like forge heat. "We are older than your words for promises. We keep compacts because that is what we are." It selected 4 sheep, the best breeding stock. They followed willingly as it walked toward the torn fence. "Winter solstice, Morrison. The stone circle. Your grandfather's blood knows the way." Then it vanished into the forest, sheep trotting behind like dogs. Frank found a locked drawer in his grandfather's desk, containing a hand-drawn map showing trails on no modern chart, leading to a circle of standing stones high in the mountains. He made the first payment that December, driving 4 prize sheep up forgotten paths. The stone circle was ancient, predating any settlement. Frank left the sheep and retreated. His flock prospered after that. Lower mortality than any farm in the county. Twins and triplets born healthy. Premium wool prices. Other farmers called him lucky. Frank knew better. He was paying protection to something older than agriculture itself. He trained his son to continue the tradition, showing him the map, explaining the compact. Some debts pass through generations. In the high mountains of West Virginia, the sheep squatch guards its ancient grounds, growing fat on the finest sheep, maintaining a bargain struck in desperation and sealed in mutual need. The torn fence still stands as a reminder. Some winter nights, Frank sees white shapes on distant ridges. Not sheep, but the things that shepherd them, in ways humans were never meant to understand. Story 16, The Snallygaster. Beth Crawford made her living capturing what others couldn't see. As a drone photographer specializing in Appalachian landscapes, she documented hidden waterfalls, forgotten settlements, and wildlife from angles no traditional photographer could achieve. But nothing in her portfolio compared to what her drone captured over South Mountain State Park in Maryland that October afternoon. She was filming autumn foliage for a tourism campaign, her custom drone gliding smoothly above the canopy. The footage was perfect, rolling hills painted in rust and gold, shadows lengthening in the late afternoon sun. Then her screen flickered. The drone's camera showed something impossible moving between the trees, something her eyes couldn't track, but the high-speed camera caught in terrifying detail. Beth rewound the footage frame by frame. There, a shape too large for any bird, moving against the wind with purposeful intelligence. The next frame showed more details. Scales that reflected light like oil, tentacles trailing from where wings met body, and a head that seemed part reptile, part bird, all predator. In the final clear frame before the camera went haywire, she saw its eye, ancient, intelligent, looking directly at her drone. The screen went black. Her controls died. The $15,000 drone simply vanished from her tracking systems. Beth stood in the empty parking area, staring at the sky where her equipment had disappeared. No crash, no debris, just gone. She should have left it alone. Should have written off the loss and moved on. But Beth had built her reputation on finding the impossible shot, and something about that eye in the footage wouldn't let her rest. She returned the next day with her backup drone, determined to understand what she'd captured. The park was emptier than usual, despite perfect weather. At the ranger station, she casually asked about large birds in the area. The ranger's expression shifted. "You lose a drone yesterday?" he asked. Beth nodded, surprised. "Third one this month. People keep flying them over the old Zittlestown area. They don't come back." He leaned closer, voice dropping. "My grandfather called it the snallygaster, said it nested in the mountain caves, came out to hunt every few decades. Of course, that's just old German folklore." But his eyes said he believed every word. Beth launched her backup drone from a different location, keeping it lower, using the trees as cover. She'd installed a signal booster and was streaming the footage directly to her laptop. If she lost this drone, at least she'd have the video. For an hour, nothing. Then her equipment started acting strange. The compass spun wildly. Altimeter showed impossible readings. The temperature sensor registered drops of 40 degrees in seconds. On her screen, frost formed on the drone's camera lens despite the warm afternoon. Movement in her peripheral vision made her look up. Something circled high above, too distant to identify but too large to be any native bird. It descended in a spiral pattern that made her stomach lurch. The movement was wrong, defying physics in ways her mind couldn't process. Through the drone's camera, she saw it clearly now. 20 feet of scales and sinew, wings that seemed to bend light around them, tentacles that reached toward her drone with deliberate intent. The head was the worst part, a metallic beak that looked sharp enough to pierce steel, eyes that held too much intelligence, and behind the head, a crest that pulsed with bioluminescent patterns. The snallygaster didn't attack her drone. Instead, it flew alongside it, matching its movements perfectly. On her screen, Beth watched in fascination and terror as the creature studied her equipment. One tentacle reached out, barely touching the drone's camera. The image exploded into static, but not before she saw something impossible. Symbols appearing in the interference, geometric patterns that hurt to look at. Her laptop screen filled with code she didn't recognize. Files appeared on her hard drive, images that couldn't exist, coordinates to places that weren't on any map, sounds that made her speakers shriek in frequencies that shouldn't be audible. The snallygaster wasn't just a creature, it was trying to communicate. The drone's camera cleared. The snallygaster hung in the air before it, wings beating in patterns that seemed almost like sign language. Beth found herself understanding, not through words, but through pure concept forced into her mind. You see? You record. You spread the seeing. More images flooded her system. Cave paintings showing the snallygaster throughout history. German settlers leaving offerings. Native tribes incorporating its image into their warnings. And always it appeared before disasters, wars, plagues, collapses. Not causing them, she realized, but warning. The creature's head tilted, fixing her with one enormous eye through the drone's camera. More concepts pushed into her consciousness. Time grows short. The deep ones wake. The earth shakes. The warnings must spread. Beth's hands moved without her control, typing coordinates into her mapping software. Locations across Appalachia marked themselves. caves, mountains, valleys. At each point, her software showed geological instabilities, seismic activities that shouldn't exist in these ancient mountains. The Snallygaster wasn't just a creature, it was a herald, and what it heralded was catastrophe. The connection broke. Her drone tumbled from the sky, controls responding again just in time for her to land it roughly in a clearing. When she looked up, the Snallygaster was directly overhead, so close she could see the texture of its scales, smell the ozone that crackled around its tentacles. It spoke, not in concepts, but in actual words that bypassed her ears. Document, warn, prepare. The mountains will not hold much longer. Then it was gone, vanishing into the sky with a sound like tearing silk. Beth sat frozen for minutes before checking her equipment. Everything the creature had shown her was still there. Files, images, coordinates. Evidence of something massive stirring beneath Appalachia, something the Snallygaster had been warning about for centuries. She uploaded everything to cloud servers, sent copies to geologists, seismologists, anyone who might listen. Most ignored her. Some called her a hoax artist. But a few, a precious few, began investigating the coordinates. They found things that shouldn't exist, caverns that went down forever, temperatures that spiked without cause, sounds from deep underground that no geology could explain. Beth never saw the Snallygaster again, but she didn't need to. She'd received its message, become part of its ancient warning system. She continues to document, to spread the word, to prepare for whatever the deep mountains are about to unleash. And sometimes, reviewing her footage, she catches glimpses of metallic scales in clouds, tentacle shadows in forests, evidence that the Snallygaster still watches, still warns, still waits for humanity to heed its impossible message. Beth Crawford made her living as a drone photographer, capturing Appalachian landscapes. But nothing in her portfolio compared to what her drone recorded over South Mountain State Park in Maryland that October afternoon. She was filming autumn foliage when her screen flickered. The drone's camera showed something impossible between the trees, a shape too large for any bird, moving against the wind. Frame by frame, she saw scales reflecting light like oil, tentacles trailing from wings, and a reptilian head with a metallic beak. In the final frame, an ancient eye looked directly at her drone. The screen went black. Her $15,000 drone vanished from tracking systems. No crash, no debris, just gone. The next day, she returned with her backup drone. At the ranger station, she asked about large birds. "You lose a drone yesterday?" the ranger asked. "Third one this month over Zittlestown. My grandfather called it the Snallygaster. Said it nested in mountain caves, hunted every few decades." Beth launched from a different spot, streaming footage directly to her laptop. For an hour, nothing. Then her equipment went haywire. Compass spinning, temperature dropping 40 degrees in seconds, frost forming despite the warm day. Something circled high above, descending in a spiral that defied physics. Through the drone's camera, she saw it clearly. 20 feet of scales and sinew, wings bending light, tentacles reaching with intent. The metallic beak looked sharp enough to pierce steel. Behind its head, a crest pulsed with bioluminescence. The Snallygaster flew alongside her drone, studying it. One tentacle touched the camera. The image exploded into static, filled with geometric patterns that hurt to look at. Her laptop flooded with unknown code, impossible images, coordinates to unmapped places. The camera cleared. The creature hung before it, wings beating in patterns like sign language. Understanding forced into Beth's mind. You see, you record, you spread the seeing. Images flooded her system, cave paintings throughout history, German settlers leaving offerings, native warnings. The Snallygaster appeared before disasters, not causing them, warning. The creature fixed her with one eye through the camera. Time grows short. The deep ones wake. The earth shakes. Warnings must spread. Her hands typed coordinates involuntarily. Locations across Appalachia marked themselves, showing geological instabilities that shouldn't exist. The Snallygaster wasn't just a creature, but a herald of catastrophe. The connection broke. Her drone tumbled, landing roughly. The Snallygaster appeared directly overhead, so close she smelled ozone crackling around its tentacles. It spoke in actual words. Document, warn, prepare. The mountains will not hold much longer." Then it vanished with a sound like tearing silk. Everything remained on her laptop: files, images, coordinates, evidence of something massive stirring beneath Appalachia. She uploaded everything to cloud servers, sent copies to geologists. Most ignored her, but a few investigated the coordinates, finding impossible things: endless caverns, inexplicable temperature spikes, sounds from underground that defied geology. Beth never saw the Snallygaster again, but she'd received its message. She continues documenting, spreading warnings about whatever the deep mountains are about to unleash. Sometimes, reviewing footage, she glimpses metallic scales in clouds, tentacle shadows in forests. Evidence the Snallygaster still watches, warns, and waits for humanity to heed its ancient message. Story 17. The Pope Lick Monster. Tyler and Jake Morrison were brothers who shared everything: the same apartment, the same love of urban exploration, the same dismissive attitude toward local legends. At 23 and 21, they'd grown up in Louisville hearing stories about the Pope Lick Monster, the half-man, half-goat that haunted the old railroad trestle. They'd always laughed it off as a story meant to keep kids from playing on dangerous tracks. They should have listened. It was a dare, really. Their cousin had called them out at a family gathering, saying they talked big but wouldn't last 5 minutes on the trestle at night. Pride and beer made the decision easy. Just after midnight on a foggy October night, they parked near the Norfolk Southern Railway trestle that crossed Pope Lick Creek. The trestle stretched out before them, a skeletal bridge of wood and steel rising 90 feet above the creek. No walkways, no escape routes, just railroad ties with gaps between them showing the long drop below. The smart thing would be to walk the tracks at ground level, take a photo, claim victory. But the Morrisons never did the smart thing. "If a train comes, we've got plenty of time to get across," Tyler said, testing the first railroad tie. It held solid despite its age. Jake nodded, though something in the fog made him uneasy. The way it clung to the trestle, thicker there than anywhere else, like it was gathering. "Let's make this quick." They were a third of the way across when they heard it. A sound that wasn't quite human, wasn't quite animal. A bleating laugh that echoed off the creek below and seemed to come from everywhere at once. The brothers froze, looking back toward solid ground that suddenly seemed impossibly far away. "Just wind in the bridge supports," Tyler said, but his voice had lost its confidence. The fog grew thicker, reducing visibility to maybe 20 feet. Then, at the very edge of what they could see, something moved on the tracks behind them. It walked upright but wrong, legs bending in too many places, covered in matted fur from the waist down. The torso was human-like but stretched, ribs visible through pale skin. The head was the worst part. Goat features twisted into an almost human face, horns curling from a skull that shouldn't be able to support them, eyes that glowed with a sick yellow light. "Run," Jake whispered. They ran, feet finding the railroad ties by instinct more than sight. Behind them, that bleating laugh grew closer. The Pope Lick Monster wasn't running. It was walking with deliberate, measured steps that somehow covered more ground than should be possible. Halfway across, Tyler's foot slipped. He caught himself on the rail, heart hammering as he glimpsed the creek far below. When he looked back, the creature was closer, maybe 30 feet away. This near, he could see its mouth moving, forming words that the wind carried away. No, not carried away. The words were going directly into his head. "Jump," the voice said, reasonable and calm. "It's not that far. The water's deep. Jump and swim away. Jump and be free." Tyler's hands loosened on the rail. The drop didn't seem so bad suddenly. The creek looked inviting, peaceful. He could jump, swim to shore, walk away from all this terror. His legs tensed to push off. "Tyler, no!" Jake grabbed his brother's arm, breaking the spell. "It's in your head. Don't listen." But Jake was hearing it too now, that reasonable voice explaining how easy it would be to step off the trestle, how soft the landing would be, how much better than facing what was coming. The brothers held each other, fighting against the hypnotic suggestion that made suicide seem logical. The Pope Lick Monster stopped 10 feet away. This close they could smell it, goat musk and rotting vegetation, and something older, like grave dirt. When it spoke aloud, the voice was cultured, almost professorial, completely at odds with its bestial appearance. 90 years I've walked this trestle, it said. 90 years of watching humans dare each other to cross. Do you know how I came to be? A farmer's son who loved his goats too much, caught in unnatural acts, hung himself right here when the shame grew too great. But the shame didn't die with the body. It changed, grew, became me. The yellow eyes fixed on Tyler. You feel it, don't you? The pull of the drop? That's my gift to the curious, a quick end instead of facing what you fear. So many have taken it. So many young men who came here to prove their courage. In the distance, a sound that made Tyler's blood freeze. A train whistle. The Pope Lick monster smiled, showing too many teeth. Ah, the 1247 freight. Right on time. Now you have a choice. Try to outrun it and me to the other side. Turn back and try to get past me to safety. Or, it gestured to the drop, take the quick way, the peaceful way. Jake made the decision for both of them. He pulled Tyler forward toward the far end of the trestle. They ran, the railroad ties blurring beneath their feet. Behind them, the creature laughed its bleating laugh, keeping pace easily. The train whistle sounded again, closer. Tyler could feel vibrations in the rails now. The fog lit up with the train's headlight, still distant, but approaching fast. His mind calculated distances, speeds. They wouldn't make it. The math was simple and final. "The support beam!" Jake shouted, pointing to a maintenance platform barely visible in the fog. It was small, rusty, might not hold them both, but it was their only chance. They dove for it just as the freight train thundered onto the trestle. Tyler caught the edge, hauling himself onto the tiny platform. He turned to help Jake, but his brother was still on the tracks, the Pope Lick monster between him and safety. Time slowed. Tyler saw Jake make the impossible choice. Instead of trying to dodge around the creature, he charged straight at it. The impact sent both of them over the edge. Jake's arms wrapped around the monster's goat legs. "Jake!" Tyler's scream was lost in the thunder of the train. He pressed himself against the support beam as car after car roared past, searching desperately for any sign of his brother in the darkness below. When the train finally passed, Tyler climbed down on shaking legs. He found Jake in the shallow creek, both legs broken but alive. The Pope Lick monster was gone. No body, no trace, just hoofprints in the mud that ended abruptly at the water's edge. Jake survived, though he never walked quite right again. The brothers moved away from Louisville, never speaking publicly about what happened. But Tyler knew the truth. The Pope Lick monster was still out there, waiting on its trestle, offering its terrible choice to anyone brave or foolish enough to cross. And sometimes on foggy nights, Tyler still hears that reasonable voice in his head, suggesting how easy it would be to return to the trestle, to finish what they started, to take the peaceful way down. He takes his medication and stays far from train tracks, knowing that some dares extract a price that never stops coming due. Tyler and Jake Morrison were brothers who shared everything. The same apartment, the same dismissive attitude toward local legends. At 23 and 21, they'd grown up hearing about the Pope Lick monster, the half-man, half-goat that haunted the railroad trestle. They'd always laughed it off. They should have listened. Their cousin dared them at a family gathering, saying they wouldn't last 5 minutes on the trestle at night. Pride and beer made the decision easy. Just after midnight, they reached the Norfolk Southern Railway trestle crossing Pope Lick Creek. The trestle stretched before them, skeletal wood and steel rising 90 feet above the creek. No walkways, no escape routes, just railroad ties with gaps showing the drop below. "If a train comes, we've got time to cross," Tyler said, testing the first tie. They were a third of the way across when they heard it, a bleating laugh that wasn't quite human, wasn't quite animal, echoing from everywhere at once. The fog thickened, reducing visibility to 20 feet. At the edge of their vision, something moved on the tracks behind them. It walked upright but wrong, goat legs bending in too many places, pale human torso stretched too long, ribs visible through skin. The head was worst. Goat features twisted into an almost human face, horns curling from the skull, eyes glowing sick yellow. They ran, feet finding railroad ties by instinct. Behind them, the creature walked with measured steps that somehow covered impossible ground. Halfway across, Tyler's foot slipped. He caught the rail, glimpsing the creek below. The creature was 30 feet away, mouth moving, words going directly into his head. "Jump. It's not far. The water's deep. Jump and be free." Tyler's hands loosened. The drop seemed inviting. He could jump, swim away from this terror. His legs tensed. "Tyler, no!" Jake grabbed his brother's arm. "It's in your head." But Jake heard it too, that reasonable voice making suicide seem logical. They held each other, fighting the hypnotic suggestion. The Pope-lick monster stopped 10 feet away, reeking of goat musk and grave dirt. When it spoke aloud, the voice was cultured, professorial. 90 years I've walked this trestle. A farmer's son who loved his goats too much, hung himself here when the shame grew too great. The shame didn't die. It became me." Yellow eyes fixed on Tyler. "You feel the pull of the drop? That's my gift. A quick end instead of facing fear. So many have taken it." A train whistle sounded in the distance. The creature smiled. "The 1247 freight, right on time. Now choose, try to outrun it and me. Turn back past me to safety or take the peaceful way down." Jake pulled Tyler forward. They ran as the train whistle sounded closer, rails vibrating. The fog lit with the train's headlight. They wouldn't make it. "The support beam!" Jake pointed to a tiny maintenance platform. They dove for it as the freight train thundered onto the trestle. Tyler caught the edge, hauling himself up. Jake was still on the tracks, the monster between him and safety. Instead of dodging around, Jake charged straight at the creature. The impact sent both over the edge. Jake's arms wrapped around its legs. "Jake!" Tyler's scream was lost in the train's roar. When it passed, he climbed down and found Jake in the shallow creek, legs broken but alive. The Pope-lick monster was gone, only hoofprints ending at the water's edge. Jake survived, though he never walked right again. They moved from Louisville, never speaking publicly about that night. But Tyler knew the monster still waited on its trestle, offering its terrible choice to anyone who dared to cross. Sometimes on foggy nights, Tyler still hears that reasonable voice, suggesting how easy it would be to return, to take the peaceful way down. He takes his medication and stays far from train tracks, knowing some dares extract a price that never stops coming due. Story 18. The Brown Mountain Lights, Doctor. Robert Sterling had spent his career debunking the paranormal with cold, hard science. As a physicist at Duke University, he'd explained away ghost sightings as electromagnetic fields, UFOs as weather phenomena, and cryptids as misidentified wildlife. When a documentary crew hired him to investigate the Brown Mountain Lights in North Carolina, he packed his equipment with smug certainty. In 48 hours, he'd reduce another legend to mundane physics. He had no idea the lights would reduce him to something else entirely. The crew consisted of Sterling, 2 cameramen, a sound engineer, and a producer who'd made her name exposing frauds. They set up base camp at Wiseman's View, the best vantage point for observing the mysterious lights that had been reported since before European settlement. Sterling arranged his instruments, magnetometers, spectrographs, infrared cameras, ready to capture data that would explain everything. The first night, nothing. Sterling lectured the crew about swamp gas, piezoelectric effects from the granite, reflections from distant highways. The producer looked disappointed. The cameraman looked bored. But Sterling was patient. Science required patience. The second night they appeared. At first just one, a soft orb of light rising from the valley between Brown Mountain and the viewpoint. Sterling's instruments went wild. The magnetometer showed fields that shouldn't exist. The spectrograph revealed wavelengths outside the visible spectrum bleeding into view. The infrared showed the lights were cold, impossibly cold, yet somehow generating photons. Temperature inversion, Sterling said, but his voice lacked conviction. No temperature inversion created magnetic fields that could bend light around themselves. More lights appeared, dozens, then hundreds, rising from the forest like luminous balloons. But these didn't drift with the wind. They moved with purpose, creating patterns in the sky, geometric shapes that hurt to perceive, mathematical equations written in light that Sterling almost understood before they shifted into something else. "Are you getting this?" the producer whispered. The cameramen were filming, but their equipment was malfunctioning. The digital cameras showed impossible timestamps, footage from tomorrow, from yesterday, from times that hadn't happened yet. The sound engineer pulled off his headphones, nose bleeding. There's something in the frequencies. Voices, but old. So old. Sterling approached the viewing platform's edge, drawn by professional curiosity that was quickly becoming something else. The lights noticed. One detached from the formation and drifted toward him. His instruments screamed warnings, radiation that should kill him, gravitational anomalies that should tear him apart, temporal distortions that should age him to dust. But he felt only a strange warmth, like coming home after a long journey. The light touched him. In an instant, Sterling understood. The lights weren't phenomena to be explained. They were observers, watchers, record keepers who had monitored this world since before the mountains rose. His mind filled with images, civilizations that predated human memory, extinctions and rebirths, the slow dance of continents, the rise and fall of species. And through it all the lights watched, recorded, remembered. But they were more than passive observers. They were gardeners, tending reality itself. When the equations of existence threatened to unbalance, they intervened. When consciousness arose in new forms, they guided. When darkness from outside tried to seep in through cracks in space-time, they sealed the breaches. Sterling saw his own civilization through their perspective, a bright flash in geological time, burning fast toward multiple possible endings. The lights had been appearing more frequently, he realized, because decision points were approaching. Humanity stood at crossroads between transcendence and extinction, and the lights were trying to communicate, to warn, to guide. "Dr. Sterling!" The producer's voice seemed to come from miles away. "What's happening to you?" He looked at his hands and saw light beginning to bleed from his skin, the same cold radiance as the orbs above. The touch had changed him, started a transformation that felt inevitable. His flesh was becoming a conduit for something larger, his consciousness expanding beyond the narrow boundaries of individual thought. The other lights descended, surrounding the observation platform. The crew huddled together, terrified. But Sterling felt only peace. He understood now why no one had ever successfully explained the Brown Mountain lights. Those who truly understood them didn't remain fully human long enough to report back. "It's all right," he told the crew, his voice harmonizing with frequencies that human throats shouldn't produce. "They're not here to harm. They're here to preserve, to protect, to prepare us for what's coming." "What's coming?" the producer asked. Sterling's eyes now glowed with the same cold light as the orbs. In them, the crew saw visions. The sun flickering, reality wearing thin, something vast and hungry pressing against the boundaries of space-time. And standing against it, a network of lights, of transformed consciousness, holding the line. "A choice," Sterling said. "Evolve or perish. Transcend or fade. The lights are recruitment. They're looking for those who can see beyond the veil, who can become part of the solution." His transformation accelerated. Flesh became translucent, revealing patterns of light beneath. His equipment registered impossible readings before shutting down entirely. The other lights pulsed in welcome as Sterling began to rise, his physical form dissolving into pure luminescence. "Tell them," he said, his voice now coming from everywhere and nowhere. "Tell them the lights aren't a mystery to be solved. They're an invitation to become something more. But the invitation won't remain open forever." He joined the formation in the sky, indistinguishable now from the other lights. The crew watched in stunned silence as the lights performed one final display, a mandala of impossible complexity that seared itself into their memories. Before disappearing into dimensions human eyes couldn't follow, the documentary was never completed. The footage was too strange, too real, too dangerous. The crew members went their separate ways, but each carried the vision the lights had shown them. The producer became a recluse, filling notebooks with equations she didn't understand. The cameramen reported seeing lights in their peripheral vision, always beckoning. The sound engineer claimed he could hear the frequency of reality itself, constantly on the verge of harmonizing with it. "And somewhere in the space between spaces, Doctor." Robert Sterling continued his research with tools beyond human comprehension, part of an ancient network of consciousness that watched, waited, and prepared for the cosmic trial ahead. The Brown Mountain lights still appear to those who know how to look, each one a transformed soul who chose transcendence over mere humanity. The invitation remains open for now, but the watchers grow concerned. Time runs short, and the darkness beyond the veil grows stronger. Soon humanity will have to choose: remain bound by flesh and face extinction, or join the lights and become something unimaginable. In the mountains of North Carolina, the recruitment continues, one brilliant transformation at a time. Dr. Robert Sterling had spent his career debunking the paranormal with science. The Duke University physicist had explained away ghosts, UFOs, and cryptids with rational theories. When hired to investigate the Brown Mountain Lights in North Carolina, he packed his equipment with certainty he'd reduce another legend to mundane physics. He had no idea the lights would reduce him to something else entirely. His team included 2 cameramen, a sound engineer, and a producer who specialized in exposing frauds. They set up at Wiseman's View with magnetometers, spectrographs, and infrared cameras ready to capture explanatory data. The first night yielded nothing. Sterling lectured about swamp gas and piezoelectric effects, but the second night they appeared. One soft orb rose from the valley. Sterling's instruments went wild, impossible magnetic fields, wavelengths outside the visible spectrum, lights that were impossibly cold yet generating photons. Temperature inversion, he said unconvincingly. More lights appeared. Hundreds rose from the forest, moving with purpose, creating geometric patterns that hurt to perceive. The cameras malfunctioned, showing impossible timestamps. The sound engineer pulled off bleeding headphones. There's something in the frequencies. Voices. Ancient voices. One light detached and drifted toward Sterling. His instruments screamed warnings. Lethal radiation, gravitational anomalies, temporal distortions. But he felt only strange warmth. The light touched him. Instantly, Sterling understood. The lights weren't phenomena, but observers who'd monitored Earth since before the mountains rose. His mind filled with visions, pre-human civilizations, extinctions, continental drift. The lights watched, recorded, and intervened when reality's equations threatened to unbalance. He saw humanity through their perspective, a bright flash burning toward multiple endings. The lights appeared more frequently because decision points approached. They were trying to communicate, warn, guide. Dr. Sterling, what's happening? He looked at his hands, seeing light bleeding from his skin. The touch had begun a transformation. His flesh became a conduit, consciousness expanding beyond individual thought. More lights descended. The crew huddled terrified, but Sterling felt peace. He understood why no one had explained the Brown Mountain Lights. Those who truly understood didn't remain human enough to report back. They're here to preserve, he said, voice harmonizing with impossible frequencies. To prepare us for what's coming. What's coming? Sterling's eyes glowed like the orbs. The crew saw visions, reality wearing thin, something vast and hungry pressing against space-time's boundaries. Standing against it, a network of lights holding the line. A choice. Evolve or perish. The lights are recruiting those who can see beyond the veil. His transformation accelerated. Flesh became translucent, revealing light patterns beneath. He began rising, physical form dissolving into luminescence. Tell them the lights aren't a mystery to solve. They're an invitation to become more. But it won't remain open forever. He joined the sky formation, indistinguishable from other lights. They performed one final display, an impossible mandala searing into memory, before disappearing into unseen dimensions. The documentary was never completed. The footage was too real, too dangerous. The crew separated, each carrying the vision. The producer filled notebooks with incomprehensible equations. The cameramen saw lights beckoning in peripheral vision. The sound engineer heard reality's frequency, nearly harmonizing with it. Somewhere between spaces, Dr. Robert Sterling continued research with tools beyond comprehension, part of an ancient consciousness network that watched and prepared for cosmic trial. The Brown Mountain Lights still appear, each one a transformed soul who chose transcendence over humanity. The invitation remains open for now. Time runs short as darkness beyond grows stronger. Soon, humanity must choose, remain flesh and face extinction, or join the lights and become unimaginable. In North Carolina's mountains, recruitment continues, one brilliant transformation at a time. And there you have it. 18 encounters with the creatures that haunt the Appalachian Mountains. From the Wendigo's hunger to the Brown Mountain Light's cosmic invitation, these stories remind us that some mysteries are better left unsolved. Whether you believe or not, remember this: every legend starts with someone's truth. Thank you for joining me in the darkness. This has been Sir Ravenclaw. Until next time, keep your fires burning bright.